Ch1, passing the torch. Naruto sat on his knees, staring at the grave sites in front of him. He and his team had just finished their first C-ranked mission, although certain variables inevitably upgraded it to an A rank. And now both of those variables lay buried in the earth. Zabuza Momochi and his partner Haku. It had started out like any other basic escort mission, Naruto and his squad traveling slowly through the land of fire to get to a port that would take them to Wave Country. But then everything changed when they were ambushed by a pair of Kirigakure Chunin known as the Demon Brothers. The battle was short, but it foreshadowed an even greater threat laying in wait for them. That threat came in the form of the Kiri's former Seven Swordsman member Zabuza, Demon of the Mist and master of the silent killing technique. After a hard-fought battle, where the trio of genin were forced to face the demon alone and save their sensei, Squad 7 managed to pull out a win. Or so they thought. Naruto's Jounin instructor, Kakashi, informed the team that Zabuza had survived the encounter. The hunter ninja that had taken him out was a fake. Estimating it would take their adversary at least a week to recover, Kakashi used that time to introduce his genin to chakra control exercises. Naruto and his teammates practiced the tree climbing technique for 7 days before they were back in action and ready for round 2. That's where things got dicey. The reason being? Over the course of that week, Naruto had met and made a friend, someone who taught him a valuable lesson. When you fight to protect someone, that is when you become truly strong. The young boy's words struck a chord with the blonde and left Naruto with a lot to think about. The following day they met up again. The boy was gathering more herbs like before, to aid in his friend's recovery, and Naruto was more than happy to help. After that, the two spent time talking before the older raven-haired boy said he needed to return home. Naruto said his goodbyes and went back to his training, hopeful that he would get to see his friend again tomorrow. That tomorrow happened to be the day Zabuza struck again, and when the blonde finally arrived on the scene, the Naruto found himself wishing that he hadn't been so hopeful. Because his friend, Haku, turned out to be Zabuza's accomplice. The feeling of betrayal weighed heavily on the young Leaf Ninja's shoulders as he did battle with his former friend. Naruto attempted to get the former Miss Ninja to withdraw, make him see that they didn't have to fight, but Haku would always just reply with the same response. I want to protect the person important to me. I want to work for that person. I want to fight for that person. I want to make that person's dreams come true. That is my dream. And so they fought. But even with Sasuke awakening his Sharingan, the two genin were no match for Haku and his crystal ice mirrors. However, Haku realized that drawing out the battle any longer could result in his defeat. So with an apology to his foes, he struck. A hail of sunban rained down upon Naruto and Sasuke. It was after not feeling any pain that Naruto opened his eyes, the ones he hadn't realized he'd closed, and was greeted with a horrific sight. Sasuke Uchiha, his teammate and friend, lay at his feet covered in needles, his body leaking blood from every wound. Sasuke had sacrificed himself to save the blonde. Everything went red for Naruto after that. The blonde only remembered feeling an intense rage, almost hatred, but the events that took place after still escape him. Kakashi would later inform him of how, after subduing both Haku and Zabuza, he chopped the blonde in the neck. The next thing Naruto did recall was hearing Gato clap, and then the bloodbath brought on by an angry Zabuza, who fought with only a single kunai in his mouth to avenge the recently fallen Haku. Naruto would later learn that it had been Kakashi that had done the boy in with his Raikiri. Soon after, once Zabuza had killed Gato and the people of Wave forced out the thugs threatening their village, Naruto and his team encircled the dying Miss Ninja and the lifeless body of Haku as it started, surprisingly, to snow. Zabuza spoke of just how much Haku meant to him, the boy's loyalty and his friendship despite the swordsman's own cruel and blunt nature, of how he wished he could follow Haku into heaven, if only so that he could tell the young ninja in person, just once, how important he really was to Zabuza. But it was not to be, and the powerful swordsman passed from the land of the living burdened with that regret. Yet through it all, Naruto Uzumaki felt more respect for Zabuza than he had ever felt for any other person in his life. I thought I might find you here, a calm voice echoed from behind Naruto. The orange-clad blonde turned his head to see the form of his sensei walking up to him. Letting out a pained sigh, Naruto replied, "Yeah, I just wanted to say goodbye one more time before we head out tomorrow." Kakashi looked on with his one eye as his student turned back to the two makeshift graves he'd constructed for the dead Kiri shinobi. Over each mound of dirt were wooden crosses made from stakes the blonde had carved from tree branches. Zabuza's blade, Kubikirabocho, thrust into the ground behind his marker. The silver-haired Jounin noticed how Naruto's gaze would linger on Zabuza's sword, as if trying to will the man back to life to take hold of it again. This surprised the elite ninja, having never seen such a look on the young boy's face. "I know it's hard, Naruto, but he died a death that was more than honorable for someone of his status," Kakashi said as he placed a hand on his student's shoulder. But he was surprised when his gesture was shrugged off. Naruto turned and looked into Kakashi's lone eye with one of his own as he said, "Oh yeah? And now what happens, huh? Is his name just gonna fade into the wind? Because I doubt Mist will put it on their memorial stone. I bet they're just gonna sweep all this up and paint him as some sort of defective weapon that they couldn't control and use him as some example of what not to be." "So you're saying you care about the reputation of an enemy ninja? A man that attempted to end your life in pursuit of his own goals?" Kakashi asked in curiosity. He'd never heard of something like this happening before. Usually a ninja was all too happy to drag an enemy's name through the mud if it meant their own fame would increase. The Jounin instructor was pulled from his musings by the blonde Genin's voice as he replied, "Of course I care. Zabuza was more than just some enemy ninja. He was a person, with his own ambitions and dreams. He was also a powerful ninja who deserves respect, and just thinking about what's probably going to happen to his reputation makes me so mad." Naruto's outburst caused Kakashi to lean back a little due to the volume, but that didn't take away from the message he got. His student held the demon of the mist in extremely high regard, and wished for people to remember the fallen ninja with honor. This cemented a decision he'd been turning over in his head the past few nights while the bridge was being finished. So, standing back to his full height, Kakashi turned as if to leave and said, "You know, something I learned about the seven swordsmen of the mist is that, whenever a member falls, their blade is passed down to whoever managed to slay them. And while technically Zabuza died from his wounds, I'd say you were the one to defeat him. It was your words that changed his mind and made him put his life on the line to avenge Haku. You defeated the demon of the mist, Naruto. Kubikirabocho belongs to you now, if you want it." And with that, the older male walked away, leaving a wide-eyed blonde sitting with his mouth hanging open in disbelief. Naruto closed his mouth, and then swiveled his head around to return his gaze to the giant blade buried in the earth. Did he dare take it? While it was true he wanted the demon of the mist to be remembered with respect, Naruto wasn't sure he was truly good enough to carry on the name. He was after all the dead last in the academy. What if I just end up embarrassing myself? What if I don't have what it takes? Zabuza was a true elite ninja, a master of stealth with more kills under his belt than most of the ninja from my own village. And on top of that, he was as powerful as Kakashi-sensei without using some special power. Kakashi-sensei even said that he'd need the Sharingan to battle Zabuza. Can I really reach that kind of level? It was a glint of light that brought the blonde out of his swirling thoughts. Blinking his shocking blue eyes rapidly, Naruto turned his attention to where the gleam was coming from, and realized it was coming from the very sword he was debating about. Naruto noticed that it was now midday. He'd been out there all morning, and so the sun was in the center of the sky, casting its light down upon all that lived beneath it. This caused Zabuza's sword to reflect the light, catching Naruto in the eye. With his attention returned to the blade, Naruto soon found himself lost in the reflection of himself that stared back at him. For what felt like hours, he stared into his own blue eyes, searching for something that he couldn't identify, before breaking the trance to look upwards towards his headband. After staring at the reflection of his headpiece, the young Uzumaki returned to looking at his own reflection. It was after another minute of silent staring that Naruto reached up and turned his headband to the side. XXX. Kakashi stood with two of his genin along the end of the Great Naruto Bridge. All of Wave Country seemed to be standing along the massive structure with the intent to see the team of ninja off. Now they just needed their fourth member. Ugh! What's taking that idiot so long? We were supposed to have left hours ago, Kakashi-sensei. Sakura wailed to her superior. Beside her, Sasuke just raised a questioning eyebrow. Kakashi didn't even bother to look up from his book as he replied, "Don't worry, Sakura, I'm sure Naruto's on his way now. You know how he likes to spend time at the grave sites." "Yeah, I guess. But the mission's over and I want to go home. Not that I don't appreciate Tazuna-san's hospitality, but I just really miss my own bed." "Well, you'll be seeing it soon," Sasuke cut in. "Here comes the loser now." And he was right. Through the crowd of people, each member of Team 7 could see a mop of blonde hair making its way towards them. Soon Naruto exited the sea of people and greeted his fellow squadmates. Two of the three were surprised by what greeted them. Naruto stood before them looking mostly the same, but there were two distinct differences. One was the fact that his headband had been turned sideways, and the other, more obvious thing, was the fact that he had the sword that belonged to Zabuza strapped across his back. Almost immediately Sakura was in his face growling. "Naruto, you moron. What do you think you're doing with that sword? What kind of ninja robs someone's grave?" She ended her interrogation with a fist to the top of Naruto's skull. Naruto massaged the small knot on his head as he answered his crush. "I didn't steal it, Sakura-chan. Ask Kakashi-sensei if you want. But I heard what you said about wanting to go home, so maybe we can talk about this later?" he said in a subdued tone. The pink-haired girl was a little taken back by the low, tired voice her usually loud teammate spoke with. She eyed him with concern for a moment, before turning to her sensei, and then saying, "You're right. I do want to go home, so let's just go." With that, the foursome made their exit from Wave Country, leaving behind a cheering crowd and taking with them each their own set of memories. XXX. The trip back to Konoha was uneventful. No ninja hiding in puddles waiting to attack. And while Sasuke was busy flashing his newly acquired Sharingan on and off, with Sakura complimenting the Uchiha on how powerful it made him look, Naruto remained silent. As he sped through the trees, the blonde's mind was continuously going over his decision to take up Zabuza's mantle. While he'd decided that it was what he wanted, he still had to think about how best to go about it. More specifically, what he'd need to work on to be a worthy successor. Naruto knew that his taijutsu needed work. He only knew the basics of the academy style, and even then he'd skipped classes, so there were definite holes in his stance. The blonde thought back to the rogue ninja style, and how he incorporated not just punches but kicks, elbows, and even his sword into his attack patterns. Next, he thought about his repertoire of ninjutsu. At the moment, Naruto counted that he had 3 combat jutsu and 1 ineffective technique that, if he was going to take this seriously, he would need to throw out. "So that leaves me with the henge, kawarimi, and my kagebunshin," the blonde deduced. "If I really want to do this, I'm going to need to seriously step up my game." Zabuza used some pretty high-level techniques, and then there's his hidden miss jutsu. Problem is, where am I going to get somebody to teach me it? Figuring he'd deal with that later, the blonde then turned his thoughts towards his speed and strength. One he lacked, the other needed work. Naruto hadn't even been able to keep up with Zabuza's movements during their first encounter. The man moved so fast it was mind-boggling. Then there was his strength, made obvious by the way he easily handled his large executioner's blade with just one hand, whereas Naruto was forced to use both just to pull it from the ground. Naruto knew he probably had the highest physical strength among his graduating class, having spent many nights conditioning his body, but he knew it wasn't going to be enough if he was to become the new demon of the mist. That's another thing, Naruto thought to himself. Am I still the demon of the mist if I'm a ninja of the hidden leaf? Was Zabuza's title based off his village or his jutsu? Shaking his head, the blonde decided that, even if the title was originally coined from the man's village, he would make it based off his use of the technique itself. Once he found a way to learn it. Naruto recalled only actually seeing Zabuza do it once, and unfortunately that wasn't enough. For him, Suddenly Naruto's eyes widened with inspiration as he remembered an impromptu lesson he'd received on the battlefield about the Uchiha clan's special dojutsu. Turning his blue-eyed gaze in the direction of his Jounin instructor, Naruto remembered that behind the man's slanted headband was one of those famous copy wheel eyes, and he'd seen Zabuza use the technique he wanted to learn. With plans to speak with his sensei after reporting in to Old Man Sarutobi, Naruto settled down and relaxed the rest of the trip home. Triple X. So your C rank turned into an A rank, and yet you continued on, knowingly putting your genin in danger? Hiruzen Sarutobi, the Sandaime, asked the Jounin in front of him. Kakashi nervously scratched behind his head as he replied, "Well, I asked them if they wanted to return home, but each of them was hellbent on aiding the people of Wave. They said something about not being able to turn away from a country in need. It was really quite noble, Lord Hokage." Hiruzen steepled his fingers and eyed each of the 3 genin that stood in his office. When his eyes landed on Naruto, he spoke up again. "And is the reason you've brought the famed head cleaver home so that you could collect the bounty on Zabuza's head?" The old man hid his surprise when the blonde shot him a disgusted look, as if such a thing were a form of blasphemy. Naruto opened his mouth to speak, but Kakashi beat him to it. "Actually, Lord Hokage," Naruto thought it'd be interesting to learn how to use the sword. He saw the way Zabuza almost defeated me with it, and figured if he could get as good, he'd be that much more likely to take that hat from you. The elderly Kage eyed his Jounin suspiciously, but didn't say any more on the subject. Instead, he let out a sigh and said, "Very well then, mission accomplished, Squad 7. You may pick up your paychecks tomorrow after we've recalculated the amounts to hand out. For now, you are dismissed." After bidding goodbye to their leader, the members of Squad 7 left the Hokage's office and began exiting the building. Once outside, Sasuke ignored Sakura's request to walk her home and began the trek to his clan compound alone. Naruto, seeing the young girl's sad eyes, attempted to cheer her up. "Hey Sakura-chan, if you want, I'll walk you home after I'm done talking to Kakashi-sensei." The sadness in Sakura's green eyes quickly turned to annoyance as she turned to look at her other teammate. "Naruto Baka, how many times do I have to tell you? I don't want to go out with you, and I don't want to spend time with you outside of team stuff. You're annoying." With that, the young Kunoichi huffed and walked off, leaving Naruto to slump a little in defeat. Sighing in resignation, the blonde turned his attention to his sensei, who had stopped and waited after hearing that his student wanted to talk to him. Naruto then asked, "Kakashi-sensei, your eye can copy pretty much any jutsu, right?" Peering over the top of his book, the silver-haired Jounin regarded his student with a curious brow. "Just about, yeah, unless it's a technique tailored specifically for that ninja, like Haku's mirrors." "Why?" "Because I was hoping you were able to copy Zabuza's hidden mist jutsuwand, that you could tell me how to do it." The older man was a little shocked at his student's request. What he'd said back in the Hokage's office was actually pretty close to what he thought was the truth, leaving out the admiration Naruto had for Zabuza for obvious reasons. So the fact that he asked to learn one of another village's signature jutsu threw him off. Eyeing the blonde cautiously, he asked, "I did actually. Why? What do you want with it?" "Your genin student asks you for help and your first instinct is to question him?" Naruto asked with an attitude. "It is, when I don't see any reason to teach him what he wants to know." Naruto turned his eyes away for a few moments, mulling over whether or not to reveal his true intentions before finally looking to Kakashi again. "I want to become the next demon of the mist, but to do that, I need to know the technique that helped make Zabuza so famous." Now Kakashi's eye was wide, his eyebrow disappearing into his slanted headband. His masked mouth hung open in shock before he replied. "And Naruto, do you understand what you just said? Do you understand what it means to take on that mantle? Because I don't think you do." The blonde in question just lowered his head, blue eyes hidden by shadows as he answered. "Actually, I do. That mission opened my eyes, Kakashi-sensei. It helped me realize that being a ninja is more than just flashy moves and a fancy nicknames. I learned that being a ninja is about stealth, and being able to think ahead, to be able to shed the blood of another human being, because when it comes down to it, it's either you or them. I understand that, to truly honor Zabuza, I have to become a real shinobi. Naruto's speech hit the copy ninja hard. He'd never met a genin that spoke with such passion or understanding of what it meant to take up the title of ninja. It was more than just putting on a headband. It was forging yourself into something beyond human. However, Kakashi needed to know one more thing before making his decision. Naruto, do you think you're ready to become the next demon of the mist? No, Naruto answered. I'm not ready, but that's why I'm going to train. For real this time. On the way back to the village, I went over the basics of what I need to improve on, and now it's time that I get to work. I'm not ready now, but I will be. That was all Kakashi needed to hear. Okay, Naruto, come with me, and I'll teach you how to use the hidden mist jutsu. XXX. The morning after his return from Wave found Naruto snoozing in his bed. The day before, he'd gotten Kakashi to teach him how to do the hidden mist jutsu. Though the surprise came when the young knucklehead learned that the technique wasn't solely dictated by a body of water, and that a caster could breath the mist out from their mouth. From there, it was simply a matter of figuring out how to transform his chakra into the right nature. This led to Naruto wondering about what the jounin meant by nature, and ultimately to Kakashi handing his student a very plain-looking scrap of paper. It's meant to react whenever someone feeds a bit of their chakra into it. Then, depending on what sort of element you align with, the scrap will change. Go ahead and try it first, and then I'll explain what your result means. The last Uzumaki quickly discovered that he was actually a wind type, which disappointed him at first, but those feelings were mollified by Kakashi explaining that such a thing didn't mean he couldn't use other techniques, just that it would take more effort to do so. Case in point being the fact Naruto had already managed to perform Zabuza's famous technique. And while the blonde was put out that he'd probably never learn the fireball jutsu that Sasuke loved to show off, he was glad to know that his massive reserves would help turn the hidden mist jutsu into an impenetrable shroud that not even the Uchiha's legendary eyes could see through. It was a small comfort, but it was the first step on the long road to his goal. Afterwards, Naruto had gone to Ichiraku's to regale the father-slash-daughter duo of his time in Wave. It was on the walk home that he noticed the looks he was getting. Now Naruto had grown used to being looked at mostly in disgust or anger, but this time the citizens looked at him with confusion and a little bit of fear. Or rather, they looked at his sword with fear. Naruto knew the civilians didn't understand the true nature of the blade, so he guessed they were just afraid that he had it. This made Naruto scoff. After returning home, he completed his workout and then went to bed. He had a busy day tomorrow. The following morning, letting out a yawn, the young genin rose from his bed ready to begin the day. After finishing his morning routine, the blonde went to get dressed. And then he stopped. As he looked at himself in the mirror, Naruto realized something. His wardrobe needed an upgrade. The blonde thought about how he'd seen not only Zabuza dress, but Haku and Kakashi-sensei as well. All three of them wore dark or neutral colors that helped keep them hidden in their environment. Staring at his reflection in the mirror, at his orange pants and his orange jacket yet to be zipped up revealing the black shirt underneath, Naruto cringed. I can't strike fear into my opponents looking like this. But where am I going to get new clothes? Everywhere I go the people want sell to me. Unless they don't know it's me they're selling to. Setting up his hands in the proper sign, and then a puff of smoke later, Naruto was replaced with a young brunette boy, with green eyes, dressed in basic civilian clothes. It didn't take long for Naruto to find a store that sold shinobi items. Being a ninja village meant that many of the stores catered to that group of clientele. With a ringing of the bell atop the door, the disguised Uzumaki made his way inside a store that looked promising. When the young woman behind the counter didn't say anything, Naruto had to hold back a grin at how successful his plan was turning out. Why hadn't he thought of this before? Scanning the shop looking for his section, the former blonde noticed that there were two women by the dressing rooms talking. The first one he recognized from the academy. She'd been a guest speaker in their Jinjutsu class. Kurenai Yuhi, if memory served right. She was beautiful, something Naruto could see even with his crush on Sakura. She had shoulder-length, raven-black hair and piercing red eyes that were shadowed with liner. The older kunoichi was outfitted in a thigh-length dress that was a mixture between a kimono and medical tape. One of the sleeves had been torn away, and this showed that her entire arm, from bicep to fingertip, was wrapped in bandages. Naruto could see mesh armor underneath from the neckline of her dress. Kurenai wore standard shinobi sandals and her headband was used to keep her hair out of her face. Turning his gaze over Naruto was met with the sight of another beautiful young woman. This one Naruto hadn't seen before. Her hair was purple and tied back in a fanning ponytail. Her eyes were a light brown and were pupilless, but that only added to their look in Naruto's mind. The kunoichi was dressed in a tan trench coat and a mesh shirt, her lower body barely covered by her burnt orange skirt. Naruto saw that she also wore shin guards, along with the standard shinobi sandals. Apparently, he'd been staring too long, because the purple-haired woman turned her eyes on him and said, "Hey kid, why don't you take a picture? It'll last longer." This snapped Naruto out of his stupor, and shaking his head to clear his mind answered, "Sorry, I didn't mean to stare. I just, got caught up in checking out two hot women. There's no need to deny it, but next time remember the golden rule. Glance and turn. Otherwise here Naruto lost sight of her, until he felt cold steel pressed gently against his cheek. You may just get hurt." Swallowing the lump in his throat, the disguised Uzumaki nodded before saying, "Lesson learned. Again, I'm sorry for staring." Anko pulled away from him and patted him on the shoulder. "Good. Sorry if I scared ya. I just feel it's my duty as a woman to curb any early signs of perversion, so that there are at least a few decent men in the world, you know." Anko, enough. If you keep antagonizing the kid, I won't treat you to dango and you'll have to buy it yourself. Kurenai cut in, taking pity on the young boy. This got the other kunoichi's attention quickly. "No. Okay. I'll stop. Just anything but that." Smirking in satisfaction, Kurenai said, "Good. Then let's go. We've been here way too long and you haven't even bought anything." As she followed her raven-haired friend out the door, Anko muttered, "Of course I didn't. We were there for you, remember?" Once he was alone again, Naruto shook his head in amusement before turning his attention back to the matter at hand, outfitting himself like a true shinobi. XXX. While Naruto perused the racks of clothing back in the store, Anko and Kurenai walked down through the streets heading for Anko's favorite shop. It was a few minutes before the purple-haired kunoichi spoke up, her voice laced with curiosity. "Was it just me? Or was that kid back in the store wearing a henge?" "No, I noticed it too," Kurenai replied. "That's weird. You have any idea who it could have been? Or why they might have been doing it?" Kurenai shook her head. "I'm really not sure about the why, but I have a good guess as to who." This interested Anko. "Really? Who was it, and how do you know?" By this time they'd made it to the dango shop, and both women sat down at the bar. While the T&I specialist motioned her order to the man behind the counter, Kurenai answered her question. "I'm pretty sure it was Naruto Uzumaki." Anko's face crinkled in confusion. "The brat your little Hyuga girl's got a crush on? How do you know?" "He's one of only a handful of people with a chakra signature as noticeable as the one he's got. The others being Lord Hokage, Kakashi, and Guy. And I don't see any reason they'd be using a transformation jutsu to go into a clothing store." "But why does the kid need to sneak into a clothing store?" Anko asked around a mouthful of the dumplings that had just been handed to her. "Because many of the villagers don't get too happy when he enters their shops. At least that's what Hinata's told me from watching him. The rest of their time together, Anko's face would remain scrunched in thought. XXX. Inside one of the changing stalls, Naruto had undone his disguise and was checking himself in the mirror. His torso was covered in a sleeveless, black hoodie zipped to the top. His lower body was hidden away underneath a pair of black cargo pants, with his kunai and shuriken holsters strapped to his thigh and hip respectively. On his feet were the regulation sandals, and his wrists were taped. His headband was tied around his forehead, but remained turned to the side, and finally, Naruto had wrapped white medical tape around the lower half of his face. The blonde turned from one side to the other, taking in his new look, before grinning in satisfaction and changing before replacing his henge. After that was done, he gathered his clothes and proceeded towards the register to check out. Once finished buying his new clothes and making sure he had extra, Naruto exited the store and returned home, where he then proceeded to once again drop his transformation jutsu. As he was putting his new wardrobe away, the blonde thought about what his first step should be to reaching his goal. "I should probably work on my taijutsu first," he said quietly to himself. And with that thought in mind, Naruto once again left his little apartment to make his way towards the library. It used to be that Naruto wasn't particularly allowed in the library. The woman who ran it banned him for being a troublemaker, but now that he was an official ninja of the village, Naruto was granted a special level of access to certain sections of the building. However, with Konoha being a ninja village, there were still some sections that only Chunin or above-level shinobi were allowed to pull from. Naruto was fine with that for now. The amount of knowledge available to him now was vastly superior to the scraps he'd been fed in the academy, so the blonde decided to make do with what he was given, and be happy with it. His obvious first stop was the taijutsu section, followed swiftly by a section dedicated to training exercises. Taking a handful of both types, the blonde ambled over to a table and sat down, before opening up the first taijutsu scroll. The Kamno-ken, or Turtle Fist, specializes in counterattacks. This style used the openings your opponent creates when they attack against them, primarily used by defensive fighters. After reading the description, Naruto knew immediately that this wasn't the style for him. He was anything but a defensive fighter, so he moved on to the next scroll in the stack. This one was called the Hakadori-ken, Hummingbird Fist. That style was quick and used jabs as its primary attack, but it required an intense amount of speed to be effective, something Naruto didn't have. This went on for over an hour, Naruto nearly losing his mind at the revelation that there were so many styles of fighting, until finally the blonde genin found the scroll he'd been looking for. After opening the parchment and reading the description, Naruto's face lit up into a 1,000-watt smile. He'd found his new taijutsu style, the Ono-ken, King's Fist. This style not only incorporated using more than just standard punches and kicks, it was also based on strength. Naruto read further and found it got a huge boost if the user was fast, although speed wasn't the primary element. And although it didn't have a 5-star defense, Naruto believed in striking first and taking out your enemy before they had a chance to counter. With his new taijutsu style selected, Naruto moved on to finding training methods to become a more effective ninja. The first one he looked at wasn't a technique, but a method. Wait, this was something that the blonde had heard of, but had never thought to try because he'd still had his head in the clouds. But now, with the realization that his current level wasn't going to cut it anymore, Naruto decided that weights may just be a good idea. And if weights seemed like a good idea, then the chakra control exercises he found were fantastic. Naruto remembered how many more clones he was able to produce after learning the tree walking technique, so he bet the water walk and waterfall run would be huge helps too. It had amazed the blonde to see Zabuza and Kakashi-sensei duking it out atop the water back in wave, so much that he hoped the silver-haired jounin would teach it to him, and now here it was, ready for him to master. Another chakra control exercise he saw was the leaf concentration that he'd done in the academy. This one the blonde skipped over though because he felt there was nothing to gain from it, and so then moved on to the next scroll. This went on for another half hour before Naruto decided that it would be a good idea to get some training in. So, he returned most of the scrolls he'd taken, and left with the few that he'd need to look at for reference. "I'll pick up scrolls on Kenjutsu tomorrow," Naruto reminded himself as he walked out the door. "Sensei probably won't have us doing any real missions for a while, so I'll have time to work on my training. I can also pick up my weights too, because if this is anything like the tree walking exercise, I'll be spending all day training." As he moved through the busy streets, Naruto wondered if it was okay to leave Kubikurabocho alone in his apartment. Because while no one really bothered him, There had been a select few that took it upon themselves to trash his home when he was younger. But then Naruto shook that thought from his mind. He was a ninja now, and no civilian was stupid enough to mess with a member of the village military, no matter how they felt about him. It took him about another half-hour to walk to the training ground Kakashi had taken them to for their bell test. Naruto had chosen this particular place to train because it had a large body of water for him to practice water walking on, as well as trees to hone his tree walking technique when he had time. Once arriving, the blonde was quick to get to work. Stripping away his new shirt, the blonde sat down on the grass and reread the water walking scroll. It explained that, to perform the technique, the user needed to emit a constant stream of chakra from the bottom of their feet and then use the repellent force to walk across the water's surface. Naruto also noticed that the scroll mentions that walking on water is more difficult than trees because the amount of chakra needing to be emitted changes constantly. After reading through the instructions, Naruto walked over towards the large lake. Closing his eyes and setting his hands into the ram symbol, the blonde proceeded to take a single step out and place his foot on the surface of the water. When he went to put pressure on it, he sank. Feeling his foot get enveloped in cold water, Naruto pulled his leg back and grimaced. Well, damn, I guess this needs more chakra than the tree walking. Alright then, let's go for round 2. Triple X. An exhausted Naruto lay flat on his back under the late afternoon sky. He'd been practicing his new chakra control exercise for hours, and the sky was beginning to take on a fiery orange hue. An hour before, Naruto finally managed to keep himself above water for a grand total of 3 minutes. After his success, the blonde took to using the next hour for physical workouts so as to better condition his body. I'm beat, the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki thought to himself. It must be this water walking thing really is tough because even walking up trees didn't wear me out this bad. Deciding it was a good time to head home, Naruto pushed himself up onto his hands, grabbed his discarded hoodie, and stood up. Swaying a little from the constant fluctuation of his chakra, the blonde put his top back on, and then turned his head when he heard a noise. Naruto sighed when he noticed a badly done disguise being held up against one of the trees. Konohamaru, I know it's you. Your stealth sucks, remember? The tarp fell and revealed a young boy dressed in a yellow t-shirt, gray shorts, a blue scarf, and a pair of green goggles. I'd expect nothing less from my greatest rival. Way to see through my cover, Naruto Nizan. Not that I'm not happy to see you, but was there something you wanted, Konohamaru? Because I was just about to go eat and head home. Konohamaru's onyx black eyes widened before he asked, Well, can I come with you, please? I wanted to spar, but we can do this instead, and you can tell me about that mission you went on. Naruto could see the hope in the younger boy's eyes. He really just wanted to spend time with the blonde. It didn't matter how. Deciding that it wouldn't be a problem, Naruto told him, Sure, Konohamaru. Let's go. The youth jumped and cheered before following after his idol. It was as they were navigating through the now sparsely crowded streets that the young Sarutobi inquired about Naruto's new attire. Hey boss, I like the new look, but what made you decide to give up your old jumpsuits? Well, it ties in with the mission I'm going to tell you about, but let's just say that I realized how much more seriously I'll be taken if I'm not wearing such bright colors. But boss, that jumpsuit helped you stand out. It let everyone know that you were Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto chuckled lightly at his younger friend's point of view. Was that how he was before his mission to wave? Deciding to answer the boy's question, Naruto said, Exactly, Konohamaru. It made me stand out. Being a ninja, I need to be able to blend in, be stealthy, and I can't do that if I'm wearing bright orange, like how you won't be very effective wearing yellow. At that moment, the blonde noticed they'd arrived at the ramen bar, so he and his shadow took their seats and ordered. Once that was done, Naruto turned to Konohamaru and began to retell his adventures in Wave Country. Throughout the story, the young academy student flashed through multiple different emotions. He thought about how cool it must have been to have gone beyond Konoha's walls, felt surprised to hear about how his idol had froze up against the demon brothers, and he also felt pride when Naruto told him of how he'd outsmarted a jounin. By the end of the tale, their food had arrived, so both of them turned to enjoy it for a few bites before the younger boy said, Wow, Naruto, That sounds like it was dangerous. I can't believe you managed to get one over on a jounin, you're amazing. Naruto smiled, although with his new look you could only tell by his eyes unless looking closely, and said, "Thanks, Konohamaru, but I didn't do it alone, although next time I'll be sure to be more helpful. That's what I was doing out at the training grounds. I need to get a lot stronger." "Oh, hey, can we spar tomorrow? We can meet up where I found you earlier and you and I can duke it out. How's that sound?" At first Naruto was going to agree just because he knew how much the younger boy missed him, but then he remembered that Konohamaru was an academy student, and tomorrow was Wednesday. Konohamaru, don't you have class tomorrow?" For a brief moment the youngest Sarutobi's face became a mask of sadness, but then it brightened as he replied, "Well yeah, I do, but I can skip it and we can hang out instead." But the blonde Uzumaki was already shaking his head no. When he saw the confused look on Konohamaru's face, he elaborated. "Actually, I want you to go to class tomorrow, okay?" "But Naruto-Nizan, you used to skip class all the time. What's the big deal if I do it?" "I skipped class because nobody cared if I went. It didn't matter whether I showed up or not because everybody was happier when I wasn't there. But you have people who want you to succeed, Konohamaru, and if you skip school to hang out with me, you'll be disappointing those people. Me included. I know the classes can be boring, but they are important, even if you don't think so right now. They lay the groundwork for you to become a talented shinobi, and I want you to have the best grip on it as possible. We'll spend time together on a day you don't have class, okay?" After listening to his idol's words, the younger boy could only nod in acceptance. "All right, boss, but only because you promised we could spar when I don't have to go to school." With that, the two ate the rest of their meal, telling jokes and stories, having a good time until it was time to go. Once he finished dropping off the brunette, Naruto made his way back to his apartment, and after making sure his sword was still under the floorboards, collapsed on his bed and fell asleep. Returned to the village and exam prep. Naruto let out a grunt of effort as he pushed one of his clones away and then turned to block a downward slash from another to his right. His Kubikirabocho clashed loudly with the one his clone possessed, and the muscles in his arms tensed to hold back the assault. Suddenly, Naruto's eyes widened at the feeling of being cleaved in half, before the body erupted into a cloud of smoke. Both clones searched frantically for the original. Unfortunately, one of them was too slow, and was soon beheaded by a spinning blade. The surviving clone looked on as the giant cleaver was brought down by gravity and buried in the earth. "Oh, come on. I swear I had it that time," cried the original Naruto, who was hanging from the tree that he'd aimed the sword from. Looking over to its creator, the clone said, "At least it got closer. A month ago you couldn't even throw it. Now you only missed the tree by like 10 feet. Naruto called back his chakra and let himself land on the ground. Pulling his weapon from its earthy sheath, he replied, "I suppose you're right, and I've managed to pull off a couple one-handed swings before needing to go back to 2, so that's something, right?" After his clone nodded, Naruto dismissed the doppelganger with a cloud of smoke. With a sigh, the blonde replaced his blade in the strap across his shirtless back and stretched. It had been a little over 3 months since his return to the village and, if he did say so himself, he was making great strides in his training. His physical ability had taken a satisfying jump, seeing as he'd taken to performing workouts multiple days a week, rather than just every once in a while with heavy weights. It was a routine that included a multitude of bodyweight exercises along with using free weights, his cardio easily coming in from the brawls he'd go into with his clones. The blonde remembered waking up one morning and being surprised at the reflection that greeted him in the mirror. With the increased strength came increased speed as well, thanks to the ankle weights he wore. Naruto dared to think he was now among the fastest genin in his graduating class, behind only Sasuke and Kiba now if he were to have any competition. But that gap would soon close as well. Along with his physical increases came chakra strength too. Naruto could now create twice as many clones as before, and each could now create a small army of their own too. The blonde had also taken to learning how to master the kawarimi, deciding that it was a move many ninja forgot about because of the fancier techniques, and yet it was just as effective and dangerous. But Naruto didn't stop at just fine-tuning an old trick. No, the young Uzumaki decided that adding a few new jutsu to his list couldn't hurt either. He chose to start with one he'd seen once. The Water Dragon Jutsu. Naruto went to Kakashi for this one, recalling the man copying the technique during his battle with Zabuza. He was a little disappointed with what he learned, however. Kakashi, while not against training him in the technique seeing as he'd learned the Kagebunshin, made it a point to tell Naruto that unlike the mist technique, he would forever need a water source in order to create the dragon. While that little piece of news made Naruto upset for a while, he soon looked past it. He had practiced with the hidden mist jutsu constantly, and now was able to perform the technique with ease, covering the whole of Training Ground 7's clearing in a matter of minutes. This gave Naruto hope that he could eventually do the same with the water dragon. Then, during one of his trips to the library, he found a saving grace. After team training with Kakashi-sensei, Naruto was trying to figure out how he would carry around a water source big enough for his dragon to be effective. The dragon was a mass of water simply laced with chakra to hold it together, meaning that he would need a lot of water to make a battle-effective attack. He found it in a water jutsu scroll. Its name, the Exploding Water Shockwave. Naruto learned that this technique was exactly what he needed. The user shot copious amounts of water straight from their mouth in a vicious torrent, and even if the initial attack missed, you now had a small lake of water to perform other water jutsu with. And to top it off, the amount of water was relative to the amount of chakra the user had to spare. It was perfect. That had been something Kakashi had informed him of after asking to learn the water dragon. The silver-haired Jounin explained that the higher a jutsu's level, the easier it would be for Naruto to perform it because he had the chakra to pump into it. This also worked with the hidden mist jutsu because the mist was laced heavily with the user's chakra. But it also had the drawback that normal low-level jutsu would be harder to master without proper chakra control because he had to focus such small amounts into them. So, Naruto set out to learn the water-style technique and then got to work on creating his dragons. Now, 3 months later, Naruto felt good about his standing among the Genin pack. While still not one of the smartest members, Naruto knew he was definitely one of the strongest. Although, he mumbled to himself as he walked towards his team's meeting spot, I should definitely work out my brain too. Zabuza was pretty clever, and he also had knowledge of foreign ninja as well as techniques. I'll need to start checking out some reading material when I head to the library now too. It was about 15 minutes before Naruto made it to the bridge Kakashi-sensei had told them to meet him at. The man had mentioned wanting to do some sparring before he decided to make an announcement. Once he arrived, the blonde noticed that his other 2 teammates had beaten him to the bridge. Sasuke was leaning against the railing with his eyes closed, and Sakura was seated on the other end. She would periodically glance over at her crush with pink cheeks. "Good morning, Sakura-chan," Naruto greeted with a smile. Then, turning his eyes towards the other male, he grumbled, "Hey Sasuke team." While Sasuke only acknowledged his greeting with a grunt, Sakura matched him with her own good morning. The pink-haired girl also took a moment to take in the sight of her blonde teammate. She noticed immediately how much more muscular he was than Sasuke, his lack of a shirt giving her a clear view of his growing pectoral muscles and his abs. Naruto seemed to be running hand in hand with puberty. There were no deeply cut lines, but the pinkette could see the strong, budding definition. The blonde's shoulders had also widened and become broader, no doubt to help shoulder the weight of the massive blade strapped to his back. Sakura could also see the strength in his calves thanks to the cargo shorts he wore. The blonde's face, however, was still hidden beneath a mask of bandages from the nose down. Another thing that seemed to work to the boy's advantage was something that usually got him laughed at. Because he was so short, the blonde's steady transformation was much more compact and noticeable. But his physique wasn't all about Naruto that was changing. Over the course of the months since Wave, Sakura began to notice that the gap between Naruto and Sasuke was inching close day by day. It had gotten to where the Uchiha was forced to use his Sharingan if Naruto removed his weights. And even before then, Sasuke would tire far faster than Naruto, eventually giving him the lead. This shocked Sakura because she always felt that Naruto was just as everyone always said, a no-talent loser. Someone who, no matter what, would never truly amount to much in terms of being a shinobi. And yet here he was giving the Rookie of the Year trouble. Ja! That's only because Kakashi-sensei spends more time watching over Naruto Baka than Sasuke-kun. He'd be 10 times better than that blonde punk if sensei would train him more. Inner Sakura butted in. But Sakura couldn't help agreeing with her. Their Jounin instructor had been spending a lot of time with the former deadlast, so it stood to reason that the kid would improve in leaps and bounds. Maybe she should say something about that today? "Hello there," came a voice from above. 3 sets of eyes turned upward, and were greeted by the sight of Kakashi seated atop the archway at the end of the bridge. "You're late again, Kakashi-sensei. That's like the 100th time," Sakura shouted in irritation. "Sorry about that," the Jounin smiled. "A black cat crossed my path and I had to retrace my steps." "Liar." Naruto, wanting to get on with training, broke up the argument. "Alright, well, since you're here now, how about we get this show on the road? Eager, aren't we, Naruto? But that's fine, if you 3 will follow me, we'll begin today's training." The foursome headed to their usual training ground. After arriving, Kakashi said, "Okay, so, I want to see how far each of you has come in the time since we've been back. My hope is that our mission to Wave has helped open your eyes to the reality of being a ninja. So we're going to have some spars." "But Kakashi-sensei, how is that any different from what we've been doing?" asked Sakura. And she was right, they just sparred together 2 weeks ago. A new voice came from behind the tree line. "Simple, Sakura. You'll be facing me." All 3 genin looked over, and their eyes widened in surprise when Iruka-sensei walked out to greet them. Naruto's face broke out into a cheerful expression at seeing one of his favorite people. "Hey Iruka-sensei, what are you doing here?" As he turned his gaze to address the cheerful blonde, the scarred Chunin was surprised at the image before him. Kakashi did mention that Naruto was different, but this is more than even I expected. Pushing those thoughts aside, and deciding to just be happy at seeing his favorite student again, Iruka smiled in return. "Kakashi asked me to come by and help him out in measuring your progress. I was more than happy to lend a hand. I can't wait to see how much you've grown, Naruto." "Alright, you 3, who wants to go first?" Kakashi asked. Sakura turned to her instructor, her mouth hanging open and an incredulous look on her face. "But-sensei, Iruka-sensei is a Chunin. How do you expect us to win against him?" "I don't, Sakura, he still has years of experience over you 3, but if you've used this past month correctly then you'll at least stand a chance." "Oh, and thank you for volunteering to go first, Sakura." The young Kunoichi just let her mouth drop to the floor before pulling herself together and walking out onto the training field across from Iruka. As she made her way over, the emerald-eyed girl thought over how she spent her time after the Wave mission. When not watching Naruto and Sasuke train under Kakashi-sensei or doing a mission with the team, Sakura usually read up on various ninjutsu or jinjutsu and learning how to defeat each one. She had also read how to escape certain traps as well as how to set them up. Unfortunately, the pink-haired Kunoichi didn't take any time to practice her taijutsu or actually learn any of the ninjutsu she studied. "I just hope I can last," Sakura thought as she entered into the basic academy stance. Across from her, Iruka had to keep from shaking his head in disappointment. The academy style was meant solely for those who had not found a style of their own yet. Many ninja without a clan, after receiving their headband, went straight to the library and found a new one without so many holes. It seems Sakura may not be taking this as seriously as I'd hoped she would. "I guess we'll just have to see," the Chunin thought as Kakashi began the match. Sakura opened with a textbook maneuver, throwing kunai to force the enemy off their feet. Following this, Sakura created 3 clones of herself and rushed forward. However, instead of avoiding the kunai, Iruka simply pulled out one of his own and deflected the knives. This left him on guard for his opponent's attack. Sakura tried to shake him up with her clones, but the Chunin could see which copies of the girl made no presence in the grass, allowing him to ignore the leg sweep and roundhouse that came at him while blocking the jab to his stomach. With her strategy ignored and her attack blocked, Sakura had to think fast. She pulled another kunai from her holster and took a slash at Irika, only for him to grab that wrist as well. The next thing Sakura knew was pain. Her former instructor headbutt her, and with him wearing his forehead protector and hers tied like a bandana, Sakura immediately went weak in the knees from the impact. Irika let go of the kunoichi's wrists and watched as she sank to the ground, her hands swiftly coming up to try and soothe the aching in her forehead. With a sigh, the scarred ninja turned to his superior and said, "Kakashi, what is this? She's been your student for about half a year. Why is she still using the academy taijutsu and tactics? I've told her already what she needs to work on, Irika, but it seems she hasn't listened to a word I've said. I'll be sure to spend some time whipping her into shape. Hopefully you'll be more impressed with my other two students," Kakashi replied. Sakura was quickly escorted off the field and to the sidelines while Sasuke took center stage. The Uchiha entered into the basic stance of his family's taijutsu and waited for Irika to come to him. Irika knew this was Sasuke's preferred method of fighting because it allowed the younger ninja to read his opponent's moves and then react to them accordingly. This way, Sasuke could measure their speed, strength, and fighting style all in one. Well then, if it's me who's supposed to make the first move, might as well make it a good one. The ponytailed Chunin disappeared in a burst of speed and reappeared to Sasuke's right. Irika slid his foot behind the Uchiha's leg and then drove his arm forward in a clothesline to the throat. With his leg behind Sasuke's, the raven-haired youth tumbled backwards, but managed to catch himself and perform a leg sweep. Irika jumped over the counterattack and then flipped backwards out of Sasuke's range. But it seemed Sasuke wasn't about to let him run away. The younger ninja rushed after his superior and attacked with a roundhouse kick. Irika blocked it with his forearm and pushed it away, before retaliating with a right hook. Sasuke saw it coming but couldn't move fast enough to dodge it, so he let it hit and then used the momentum to carry into an elbow attack that landed squarely in his opponent's chest. The Uchiha followed this up with a scissor kick to the chin. However, Irika recovered faster than he'd expected and managed to grab a hold of Sasuke's ankles. From there, the Chunin lifted Sasuke higher and finally slammed his back into the ground. Sasuke coughed up a bit of bile due to the harsh impact, but quickly pushed past the pain and rolled backwards out of Irika's reach. Once a sufficient distance away, the young ninja ran through a series of hand signs before calling out his attack, "Fire Style, Great Fireball Jutsu." After Irika easily avoided it using the replacement technique, Kakashi called for a stop to the match. "Why?" Sasuke asked. "I could still fight, and I hadn't even used my Sharingan yet." Kakashi just smiled and replied, "I know, but remember, these spars are just so I can see how you've all progressed. And you've done very well, Sasuke. Managing to hold your own against a Chunin after being a genin for such a short time is no easy task." Sasuke just grunted and moved to the sidelines next to Sakura, who was still nursing her wound. However, this didn't stop the girl from congratulating her crush. "Way to go, Sasuke-kun. You were amazing against Irika-sensei. If you had used your Sharingan, I think you may have beaten him." But the raven-haired youth ignored her, choosing instead to focus on the next match. Naruto had gotten significantly stronger over the last few months, and Sasuke wanted to know how the blonde would stack up against a Chunin now. Would he do better than Sasuke, or worse? Naruto pulled Kubikirabocho from his back, and then removed the ankle weights and wristbands from his body as well. While he wanted to show off his skills in Kenjutsu, the blonde had decided that against his old teacher such a thing was unnecessary. Sasuke, on the other hand, had a different thought. "What's the matter, loser? Can't swing the sword. What's the point of carrying it around if you don't use it?" But Naruto just ignored the smart-mouthed Uchiha. It was true, though. Sasuke had never seen Naruto wield the infamous blade since he'd brought it home. But that was because Naruto decided that during spars against a fellow teammate it was dangerous. The blonde became completely serious when he unsheathed his sword, and he didn't think Sasuke would be able to handle him then. So Naruto just moved to his side of the field and entered into his opening stance. Irika was interested in the stance his former student took up. His feet were shoulder-width apart, knees bent, and his left arm was held to the side at a 90-degree angle. His hand balled up into a fist. The blonde's right arm was held up and bent inwards, the forearm blocking his face, while the hand was formed like a claw. Asterisk. The king's fist, an appropriate taijutsu for Naruto. Let's see how far he's come with it, Irika thought with pride, before being shocked as Naruto disappeared from view. What the ah? The Chunin cried out as his legs were swept from under him from behind. While managing to catch himself, the man's attempt at a retaliation kick failed, as Naruto had expected it and moved away beforehand. Irika righted himself and kept his eyes trained on the blonde before him. He couldn't afford to let his guard down, it seemed. Deciding to take a page from Sasuke's book, Irika weaved through the same hand signs and sent a decently sized fireball towards Naruto. However, where the Chunin expected him to dodge it and set himself up to be attacked, Naruto simply weaved through his own set of signs before using his exploding water shockwave to punch a hole straight through the fire. The speedy torrent hit Irika dead center in the chest, but the man's body was soon replaced by a log. Naruto canceled his attack and strained his already impressive hearing to catch any clue to his opponent's next move. It paid off, as the blonde threw up his forearms in a crossblock to defend against a hammer fist from above. Afterwards, the Uzumaki countered with a Spartan kick that caught the unguarded shinobi and sent him flying. But Irika wasn't a Chunin for nothing. The man quickly righted himself and was prepared for his former student's next move, which came in the form of a trio of Kagebunshin. The three Narutos came at him in a triangle formation. As he jumped over one's leg sweep, the second was there to hit him with a roundhouse. As he blocked the kick in midair, Irika was left open to the third kick that was aimed at his back. The last clone sent him flying forward before they all dispelled. This made Irika an easy target for Naruto's next attack, the Water Dragon Jutsu. With the field flooded with water from his previous attack, the blonde had plenty to work with. Next thing Irika knew, he was being hit head-on by a B-ranked ninjutsu. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Alright, I think that's enough, Naruto, good job, Kakashi called out, putting an end to the spars. Naruto quickly strode over to help Irika up off the ground. You've definitely come a long way from being the knucklehead class clown, Naruto, the academy instructor praised. Thanks, Irika-sensei, it really means a lot to hear you say that. But I know you weren't really trying, or else I never would have landed those hits. You underestimate yourself, Naruto. A Chunin is only as good as his training after all. Now, when did you learn such an advanced technique like the Water Dragon? Irika asked in wonder. Naruto's eyes shined happily as he replied, Kakashi-sensei taught it to me. Pretty cool, huh? At this point, Kakashi cut in. Yes, we get it, Naruto, you're becoming a force to be reckoned with. Now, Irika, what's your opinion of them? The scarred Chunin swept his eyes over Team 7 before turning back to Kakashi. Letting out a sigh, Irika said, I really wish you'd wait another year before doing this, Kakashi. But I can't disagree that this will be good for them. It'll give them a good idea of what they're up against concerning the other villages' ninja, as well as tell them where they stand among their fellow Leaf Shinobi. I concede. Kakashi-sensei, what's he talking about? Asked Sakura. The Jounin turned to the kunoichi of his team and answered, What he's talking about, Sakura, is how I've recently nominated you 3 for the Chunin exams. All 3 genin looked back and forth between the 2 older ninja before Naruto said, Well now, this will be fun, and I'll even get to see how I stack up against the competition. Thanks, Kakashi-sensei. You're welcome, Naruto. Now, here's your registration forms. The exams will begin 5 days from now at 3 p.m. sharp. You are to go to the Academy building and wait in room 301 for your first proctor. Kakashi instructed as he handed each genin a small form to fill out. With that, the silver-haired Jounin bid his students good luck and left via Shunshin. Irika quickly followed, mentioning how he'd only asked his substitute teacher to stay half the day. Once the 3 were alone, Sasuke sighed and made to leave, throwing over his shoulder, I'll see you guys at the academy. Don't be late. Sakura, seeing the Uchiha leaving, called out, Hey wait, Sasuke-kun. Why don't you and I spend the 5 days together? You know, do something personal to help build our teamwork." The Uchiha heir stopped and looked over his shoulder. Sakura was immediately put off by the look in his onyx black eyes, and it got worse as he opened his mouth. "Or how about you use the 5 days to work on your skills? Even Irika-sensei said you needed help, so instead of flirting and primping yourself up to look pretty, why don't you learn a new taijutsu form and a couple of genjutsu? Things to help make the team stronger." With his piece said and done, Sasuke turned and continued his walk home. Caring nothing for the girl he just left torn apart in the field. Sakura's head and shoulders slumped in defeat at her love interest's words. Naruto, seeing this, made an attempt to cheer his crush up. "Hey, Sakura-chan, why don't you and I train together? Forget about Sasuke team, he's not even that tough, heck I can already beat him. If we train together you'll get stronger in no time." Her response was nothing like he'd expected. Sakura began to tremble, and while at first he thought she was going to cry, Naruto was quickly on guard when the pink-haired Kunoichi turned to him with anger in her eyes. "Why can't you just back off, Naruto Baka? I don't want to hang out with you. I've lost count of how many times we've been through this. Why can't you just listen?" Naruto, for his part, couldn't help feeling hurt. Sure, she had said something along those lines, but the blonde didn't think she really meant them. But now, for the second time, Sakura was telling him to really get lost, saying that she'd rather be alone without Sasuke than give him a chance. The blonde genin's ocean blue eyes lowered in resignation. He felt there wasn't even a point in asking if she thought of him as a friend. Seeing as a friend would have let him down a lot more gently than Sakura had. Finally, Naruto managed to pick his eyes up and look at the pink-haired girl that still stood before him. "Okay, Sakura, I'm sorry. I hear you and I won't bother you anymore. I'll see you at the exams." And with that, the blonde made his own exit, leaving Sakura to also walk home alone, and his dream of them together to fade into the wind. XXX. Naruto's eyes opened slowly as the morning sun peeked through his window. As he sat up and stretched, the blonde genin's fuzzy mind slowly rebooted from being sent into hibernation mode during the night. That's when he recalled the day before. He was entering the Chunin exams in 4 days. Immediately after this thought, Naruto's unwrapped face broke into a foxy grin, and the young Uzumaki jumped out of bed in excitement. There were sure to be lots of other genin taking the test, and from what Irika-sensei said, many of them would be from foreign villages. This meant Naruto would already be able to start making a name for himself. "This is going to be great," he thought as he made himself a bowl of cereal. As he ate, the blonde thought about how he should spend the next 4 days. While at first he thought of training, the young ninja quickly discarded that thought. It wouldn't do for someone to see his skills before the test. Then he thought about how he'd made it a point to learn more general knowledge, and decided to spend his time at the library. With his game plan set, Naruto finished his cereal and got ready for the day. Once his morning routine was finished, the blonde set about getting dressed. He slipped on a pair of cargos and a hooded vest, before attaching his weights and weapon pouches, and finishing it off by re-wrapping his face and tying on his forehead protector. After a look in the mirror, and with a look of satisfaction at what he saw, Naruto exited his home, once again leaving his sword, so as not to give anything away to the competition. As he walked through the streets, Naruto immediately took notice of some of the foreigners that had already entered the village. But it wasn't hard, they had different symbols on their headbands than him after all. Many of them looked like nothing special, just your run-of-the-mill genin, but one person did catch his attention. A girl with shocking red hair. This girl interested Naruto because he'd never seen anyone with that color hair before. Sure, Sakura's was pink, but so was her mom's. Red was a hair color that Naruto hadn't ever seen on anyone in his village before. Taking a closer look at the girl before he lost sight of her, Naruto took in the glasses on her face, and her unusual eye color as well. The blonde had to admit, the girl was kinda cute. The girl must have felt his eyes on her though, because she began to turn her head, which forced Naruto to look away, lest he be caught staring and cause a scene. After he turned a corner, and was out of sight, the blonde returned to his journey and headed for the library. His mind stuck on what kind of ninja would have red hair. Triple X. How can there be nothing? Are ninja with red hair really not that weird? Naruto groaned as he thumbed through his fifth aisle of books and scrolls. He'd been there for almost an hour and still hadn't found anything. Maybe red hair just wasn't common in his village, but was everywhere else. As he was about to slip his latest pick back into its spot on the shelf, a flash of purple caught his eye and he turned to look. He was met with the sight of Anko entering the aisle he was in. In her own hands was a blue book, and she too had a look of annoyance on her face. "Couldn't find what you were looking for either?" he asked in an attempt to make conversation. With her eyes downcast in disappointment, Anko didn't see who had been speaking, and when she turned them up to make sure the person was talking to her, she greeted with a sight she hadn't expected. "I recognized the voice, but not the face. So is this what the Kyuubi Jinchuriki really looks like?" she thought to herself. As she took him in, Anko realized that the young teen in front of her wasn't at all what she'd been expecting. She'd heard the tales of his pranks from other members of the T&I department, and while she found many of them funny, the special jounin knew a cry for attention when she saw one. But this genin didn't look like the type to care about such things. Anko took in how the clothes looked on the now blonde-haired ninja. The vest didn't hang loosely from his frame, instead it stretched a little under his athletic torso. His arms showed clear signs of growing muscle, and his shoulders were strong. Looking up at his face, the kunoichi had to force herself not to laugh. Was he taking after Kakashi now? After her quick observation, Anko decided to reply, "No, unfortunately I didn't. And from the sound of it, neither did you." Shaking his head, Naruto answered, "Nope. So what were you trying to find?" "If there was anywhere else besides Konoha that sold gomadango, but there isn't," Anko replied, her shoulders slumping in discouragement. Naruto stared at her for a moment, as if expecting her to suddenly tell him she was kidding, but when she didn't, he asked, "Are you serious?" The annoyed look he got was more than enough proof. Anko held up the book she'd been reading, showing it to be an international food journal, and said, "Of course I am. When I'm out on a mission, there's always a chance I'll end up slumming it in another village. So it'd be nice to know I can still have my favorite food away from home. But I'm finding out nobody except Konoha makes it." She growled at the end, folding her arms in frustration. Naruto didn't know what to make of the sight. Here was a woman, a kunoichi no less, that looked to be a few years older than him, pouting like a child over sweets. He couldn't hold back a small laugh. They stood close enough, though, that Anko could hear it. Narrowing her eyes, she challenged, "Oh yeah? Well, what was so important that you couldn't find?" This got Naruto to immediately stop laughing. The blonde knew that his quest was just as silly, and to reveal it would be embarrassing after laughing at Anko's misfortune. However, the choice was taken from him when Anko simply plucked the yellow book from his hand and read the cover. It was deathly quiet, and Naruto waited for the inevitable jibe. But it didn't come. Instead, a teasing grin etched its way onto Anko's face as she asked, "So, interested in kunoichi with odd hair colors, huh? I guess I left a better impression on you than I thought back at the clothing store, huh?" Whatever Naruto had been expecting, this wasn't it. As the special jounin held up the book, showing off the title of Legendary Kunoichi with Strange Hair Colors, Naruto's face lit up like a cherry. "What? No, it's nothing like that, okay? I saw this girl from another village, and she had red hair, so I wondered if that meant anything special. That's all, really," the flustered young teen explained. At this, Anko's playful smile broke down into a pout. "What? Am I not good enough for you, Gaki?" She couldn't really see it, but Anko was sure the blonde's mouth was wide open. Unable to keep up her charade, the special jounin broke out into laughter as she slipped the two books back onto the shelf, not caring if they were in the right spot. The older woman's laughter broke Naruto out of his stupor, and then he pouted as he grumbled quietly to himself. After getting a hold of herself, Anko patted the younger ninja on the shoulder and said, "I don't get all upset on me now, kid. I wasn't serious. Besides, there's a height requirement for anyone who wants to make a move on me." Hearing the barb at his lower-than-average height, Naruto's expression swiftly molded into one of fierce annoyance. Yeah, well, you're too tall. Wait, the blonde stopped, suddenly remembering something. How did you know it was me at the store? Anko met his curious stare with a smirk as she answered. My best friend is the village's leading expert in genjutsu. She spotted your henge from across the store. I suspected something, and when I asked her about Kurenai told me it was you. Apparently you have an easily recognizable chakra signature. That last part interested the blonde genin. Chakra signature, he thought. What was that? But before he could ask her, Anko looked at the watch on her wrist and said, and speaking of Nai-chan, I'm supposed to meet her after her team's meeting. I'd better go now. She's such a pain when I'm late. See you later, shrimp. With that, the purple-haired woman left in a swirl of smoke, leaving Naruto alone. While slightly discouraged he couldn't ask about chakra signatures, the young Uzumaki quickly remembered he was in a library and headed off to the shinobi section to find a scroll on the subject. XXX. As Naruto studied up on his newest interest, Anko appeared along the branch of a tree that overlooked one of the Leaf's many training grounds. This one in particular was being used by the members of Team 8. Standing off to the side was her friend, Kurenai Yuhi. The older woman's attention was concentrated on the two students that were currently sparring. One was a young male. He wore a gray, hooded jacket with fur lining all its openings. He was a tanned young teen, with feral features and triangular tattoos on his cheeks. This young genin was Kiba Inuzuka. Kiba's opponent was a young girl. She too wore a hoodie, though hers was a cream color and significantly baggier than her male teammates. The young Kunoichi had a head of dark, blue-tinted hair and fair skin, but her most recognizable feature were her eyes. This young girl had a pair of pupil-less lavender eyes. She was Hinata Hyuga. At the moment, Kiba and Hinata were each attempting to overcome the other's defenses, though Anko could see that it was only Kiba who was really trying. So, while Hinata was doing a good job of holding her own, she was slowly being defeated. Anko shook her head, not able to understand why such a promising Kunoichi was so hesitant. However, as she turned her attention back to Kurenai to see her reactions, Anko wound up locking gazes with her fellow jounin. Smiling, the purple-haired woman dismounted her perch and walked over to Kurenai. Throwing up her hand in greeting, she said, "Hey, how's the training going?" The red-eyed jounin nodded in greeting, before turning her attention back to her students and asking, "Why don't you tell me? You were just watching them." "Yeah, you noticed that, huh? Anyway, what's the deal with your Kunoichi? She's barely even trying against her teammate. Is she sick or something?" Kurenai shook her head, letting out a sigh as she replied, "No, that's Hinata. She's not very confident in her ability to be a ninja, and unfortunately it's to the point where she second-guesses every move she makes, resulting in what you see here." As she explained it, Hinata was being brought down by her enthusiastic opponent, and soon found herself lying flat on her back, having had her legs knocked from under her. With that, Kurenai called out, "Okay, you two. That's enough for today. You guys can head home. Be sure to come to the meeting on time tomorrow. I have something important I want to discuss with you." As they were leaving, Kiba eyed his jounin instructor and asked, "What about Shino? He couldn't make it to practice today. How's he gonna know?" When Shino informed me he wouldn't be here today, I explained that we'd be meeting tomorrow as well, and I expressed the same desire for promptness as I did with you. What I have to say tomorrow is important. The explanation being good enough for him, Kiba exited the clearing, after waving goodbye to his female teammate. Hinata, muttering a quiet goodbye of her own, also left the training ground. Once the genin were out of earshot, Anko looked over to her friend and asked, "So you're really going to enter them into the Chunin exams?" As the two women made their own exit, Kurenai replied, "Yes, they may just be rookies, but I have faith in their ability to succeed. Each of them shows great promise as a shinobi, and I truly believe they have a chance of doing well in the exams." "And how do you think they'll do against the other rookie teams?" Anko asked, her mind conjuring the image of the blonde she'd just left. There aren't too many I'm worried about. Aside from Sasuke Uchiha and Shikamaru Nara, I don't think my team has any real competition. The other 6 just aren't up to par yet. I really can't believe Asuma and Kakashi think their teams are ready for the exams. Anko eyes the elder Kunoichi curiously, as the woman's slightly arrogant tone was unlike her, but decided the woman knew her students better than the special jounin and just had faith in their abilities. XXX. Naruto walked through the streets of his village, not really having a destination in mind, merely enjoying the lively activity and the nice weather. He'd spent a few hours at the library studying up on chakra signatures and then researching the different hidden villages. While Konoha's knowledge wasn't very extensive, those places not being very open with their information, Naruto did learn a little bit about the different types of ninja there were in the world. While some of it had been boring, the blonde never having been one for book learning, Naruto forced himself to concentrate on the pages and the information written on them. No one would take an uneducated shinobi seriously, and the blonde couldn't afford anything less. Now, with the studying put on hold, Naruto just let himself wander. It was as he walked through one of the empty streets that Naruto heard a shuffling sound behind him. The spiky-haired ninja looked back, and was met with the sight of a crudely done disguise in the shape of a rock. A square rock. Letting out a disheartened sigh, Naruto called out, "Really, Konohamaru? When have you ever seen a rock shaped like a perfect square? Especially one with eye holes? You always manage to see through my disguise, boss." A voice called out under said garb, before the box erupted into a large cloud of colored smoke, revealing 3 young academy students. The first was Konohamaru. He'd gotten rid of his long scarf and wore a dark green shirt with brown shorts, a vast improvement from his yellow and white attire. To the boy's right was a young girl. She had her orange hair done up into 2 very large pigtails. She wore a red t-shirt and brown shorts. Standing at Konohamaru's left was another young boy, this one also a brunette. He wore glasses, a baggy, long-sleeved blue shirt and khaki shorts. He also had a runny nose. All 3 wore the goggles he once wore before becoming a genin. Naruto watched as the 3 youngsters introduced themselves as the Konohamaru Ninja Squad. "So these are your friends from the Academy Con?" Naruto asked as he eyed the 2 other children. "Yep, I was talking to Irika-sensei about the spar we had the other day and they overheard. Moegi and Udon asked if I could introduce you to them after hearing how strong you are." Both of the aforementioned academy students nodded excitedly in agreement before the girl, Moegi, asked, "Is it true you're training Konohamaru outside of school, Naruto-san?" "When I get the chance, yes. I want to make sure Konohamaru gets as much help as possible, so that when he becomes a genin I won't have to worry about him out in the field," Naruto replied. "So does that mean you'll teach us?" Udon asked hopefully. But before Naruto could answer, an undignified snort interrupted his train of thought. "This is what you do in your free time? Hang around with little kids?" The small group turned their attention to the voice that had spoken, and were greeted with the sight of Sakura walking towards them. As the pinkhead approached, Naruto had to chomp down his usual greeting, and instead asked, "And what if it is? What's wrong with helping others get stronger, Sakura? I offered the same to you, but you just threw it back in my face," he thought sadly. "What's wrong is you should be preparing for the Chunin exams, not playing games, Naruto Baka. I don't want you holding us back during the test." Naruto's brow furrowed in confusion. "But Sakura, Irika-sensei said you were the one who needed help. He was more than impressed with my performance, remember?" While Naruto hadn't meant for it to be taken as an insult, merely a pointing out of fact, Sakura took it as a barb at her skills. And coming from Naruto, the class clown, that was unacceptable. "What do you know, dead last? If you weren't always pestering Kakashi-sensei, then maybe he'd have more time to train me and Sasuke-kun." But before Naruto could respond, Konohamaru's voice rang out in a whine. "Man, Naruto-nezen, is this what you have to put up with all the time? I think I'm gonna blow an eardrum if she keeps this up. What is she? Some kind of harpy?" Naruto never got to ask where the young Sarutobi even heard that word before, because Sakura's anger skyrocketed at the insult. What did you just call me? Ja. I'm gonna pound that little runt. Inner Sakura raged along with her. As she made a move to grab Konohamaru, the young boy managed to slip away, and then he turned and ran, with Sakura hot on his heels. Naruto just sighed and, looking to the remaining two kids, said, "Well, we should probably go after them. Come on, and if she hasn't killed him, I'll spend some time helping you guys train." It wasn't long before they found the two, but when they did, Naruto's eyes immediately narrowed in anger. After turning the fence corner, Naruto and the two children found Konohamaru being held up by the throat, while Sakura stood off to the side trying to stammer out an apology. Naruto took in the guy holding his friend hostage, but wasn't very impressed with what he saw. The guy, obviously a ninja, was tall. He was dressed in a black, baggy suit that covered his entire body, and his face was lined with purple paint. On the guy's back was a wrapped bundle of cloth that had what looked to be a tuft of brown hair sticking out from the top. "Put him down, Kankuro. I don't feel like getting into trouble just because of your stupidity," a female voice said. This drew Naruto's attention to a girl that stood behind the now named Kankuro. She, like Anko, wore a full-body mesh suit under her clothes, which consisted of a lavender battle dress, tied at the waist by a crimson sash. Naruto noticed that she too was a blonde, though hers was sandy, and pulled back into 4 spiked pigtails. On her back she carried a giant battle fan. Konohamaru's cry of pain drew his attention back and reignited his anger as he shouted, "You should listen to your teammates' advice, because if you don't let him go, there's gonna be trouble." The genin known as Kankuro turned his beady eyes in Naruto's direction, and with a sneer, said, "Oh great, more brats. This village must be full of them. Look, this little pipsqueak ran into me, and he hasn't apologized for it, so I'm a little mad. I wouldn't suggest making it worse. I'm giving you one last warning. Let him go," Naruto replied, his eyes hardening like ice. And Kankuro did just that, only to reach behind him and pull his package from its place and slam it on the ground. "You know what I think? You all need a lesson in manners," he growled. The blonde kunoichi looked like she was about to say something, but before she could voice her words, Naruto vanished. "Well, you know what I think? Next time, you'd better think twice before challenging an opponent that's faster than you," a voice whispered from behind Kankuro, causing the puppet user's eyes to widen in shock. He whipped around, trying to catch his fellow genin with his elbow, but the attack missed and he was sent tumbling back after a palm strike to the chest. From his place on the ground, Kankuro seethed. "Who the hell did this punk think he was? You surprised me there. I didn't think you'd be that fast, but next time I won't be caught off guard. Ouch." As he spoke, Kankuro made to get back on his feet, but a pebble to the side of the head stopped him and drew everyone's attention to a tree beyond the fence. Sitting up on one of the branches was Sasuke, juggling another pebble in his hand. "You guys are a long way from home and way out of your league," the last Uchiha warned before crushing the pebble in his hand. Looking between the two leaf shinobi, the sandy blonde smirked to herself. "Well, if nothing else, at least the Leaf Village guys are better looking than the ones back home." But the smirk soon turned to a look of fear as she sensed him. "Kankuro, get up and stop embarrassing yourself. You're a disgrace to our village," a raspy voice echoed through the area. While Sakura and the children couldn't seem to find the person, Naruto followed the two foreign shinobi's line of sight to the tree that Sasuke was seated on, and couldn't hold back his surprised look at what he saw. A redhead stood, upside down, along the branch above Sasuke, who from the looks of it didn't sense the boy's presence until just that moment. The redhead was dressed in a brown and black attire, with a mesh shirt underneath, and a large gourd strapped to his back. "Jigara, hey, it's not what it looks like." Till they started it, Kankuro tried to explain, but the boy, now named Gaara, cut him off. "Shut up, or I'll kill you." The boy's response shocked the Leaf Ninja. He'd kill his own teammate just for talking? Who the heck was this guy? But Naruto never took his eyes off him, and followed the other boy's moves as he vanished from the tree and moved to the ground via sand shunshin. In the light, Naruto was able to make out the kanji for love tattooed on Gaara's forehead. "I'm sorry for my teammates' idiotic behavior," Gaara said, breaking Naruto from his observation. "I warned them about acting foolish while visiting your village, but it seems they didn't take me seriously. I'll correct that behavior soon, and there won't be any more problems, I assure you." Wary of the trio, but not wishing any harm to come to the two troublemakers, Naruto said, "No, it's alright. We should have paid more attention to where we were going. It's us who should be apologizing." It seems Gaara could read his mind, because his next words were an introduction. "My name is Sabako no Gaara, and you?" "Naruto Uzumaki. I take it you're here for the Chunin exams then?" "Yes, and I look forward to facing you in them, Naruto Uzumaki." With that, Gaara turned and began walking away, giving a nonverbal signal to his teammates to do the same. What nobody noticed was the trio staring down at them from atop a roof nearby. Triple X. The next 4 days passed much the same for Naruto as the first, only significantly less drama. He woke up, went about his morning routine, then headed to the library to do some studying. Although he knew he'd have to look over certain subjects again in order to really remember them, like the different poisonous plants that grew around the continent, others he managed to pick up right away, like the basic knowledge of the Byakugan, the Hyuga clan's dojutsu. However, with his inability to train, Naruto became anxious as the days passed. The blonde practically bounced in his seat while eating as he thought about the Chunin exams. Then, finally, the day came. On the morning of the Chunin exams, Naruto leaped out of bed with a loud cheer. "Yes, finally, the Chunin exams are here. I finally get to show everyone what I'm made of." The blonde's excitement was quieted when his eyes landed on Kubikirabocho, which he'd settled next to his bedroom door the night before. Seeing the large executioner's blade reminded Naruto about his plan, and sobered him up as the excitement was replaced with the feeling of responsibility. The exams were more than just a chance to advance. They were his first step towards honoring Zabuza. He was the heir to Kiri's demon now, and it was time everybody knew Ich.3 making a name. Naruto stared into his reflection's eyes as he wrapped the bandages around his face. Sapphire gems were hardened with purpose, and his muscles twitched in anticipation of the obstacles to come. Once Naruto was finished with his face, he looked over the rest of his uniform, making sure he was all set to go. His hooded vest was clean and zipped to the top. From the waist down, his cargoes were fitted, and the weapon pouches were filled to the brim. The blonde's weights being left forgotten, as he wanted to be ready for anything that day. Finally, Naruto looked behind him using the mirror, taking in the sight of his sword, and nodded. It was time to go. As he roof-hopped over the streets of Konoha, Naruto thought about the competition he'd be facing. The blonde knew for sure at some point he'd some face-to-face with Gaara. The redhead just seemed like the type who wouldn't be defeated easily. There was also the other genin from his own village, the other rookies if they competed, and even the possibility of facing his own team. All of this made Naruto anxious, but the blonde pushed that down as he neared the academy. After hopping down from his last roof, Naruto jogged over to where he saw Sasuke standing by a tree. The two boys shared a nod of acknowledgement, but otherwise remained still, waiting for their third squadmate. They weren't made to wait long, as Sakura's vibrant pink hair soon came into sight. "Are we all ready?" Sasuke asked. "Because once we go through those doors, there won't be any turning back." "You bet, Sasuke-kun. We're gonna ace these exams," Sakura replied confidently. Inside her mind, the girl's inner self was pumping her fist, daring the other genin to bring it. Naruto just gave his fellow genin an affirmative nod to show he was ready. And with all three of them set to go, Team 7 made their way into the academy building. "And so it begins," the blonde thought as he entered the air-conditioned school. They made it up 2 flights of stairs before the trio came across an odd sight. A large number of genin were grouped around a single doorway. The door was being guarded by 2 older-looking genin. "Hey, come on. Let us in, we're trying to take the Chunin exams," A young girl with buns in her brunette hair pleaded to the guards. One of them, a guy with squinted eyes, scoffed and replied, "Faye, you all should be thanking us. We've tried taking the Chunin exams multiple times, and even we haven't succeeded yet. You all should just go home and wait till you're older." Naruto watched the exchange of words with confusion. The sign above the door said 301, but they'd only gone up 2 flights of stairs. Naruto knew the academy building like the back of his hand, as he'd spent a great deal of his life in it, and he'd pulled a lot of pranks here, so it was only natural. The thing that confused him was, why had they done this? "Hey!" Sasuke called out, breaking Naruto from his train of thought. "Take down the genjutsu already. You're not fooling anyone. We've only gone up 2 sets of stairs, so how can we be on the 3rd floor?" Naruto watched as all the other genin realized that what the Uchiha heir said was true. The blonde did too, but then he thought about why they all would have been tricked. It was a test. Those who couldn't see past such a simple ruse wouldn't even deserve to take the actual exam. It all made sense. But I didn't figure that out until now. I wonder how long some of the other teams were standing here. Suddenly Naruto felt a strong breeze hit him in the face, and the blonde shook his head to pull himself from his thoughts. Looking around, Naruto saw that Sasuke was about to engage one of the guards, but they'd both been stopped by a kid in green spandex. Impressive. Please, let us save the fighting for the actual competition. The officials have spent months setting this up. Let us not waste all their hard work with such sloppy show, the spandex-clad genin said as he let go of Sasuke and the guard's legs. Naruto noticed Sasuke sending the oddly dressed other boy a wary look, and decided to ask him about it later as he heard the bun-haired girl reprimand the teen. "Lee, you're the one who told us we had to hide our strength. What was that all about?" She was joined by another male. This one had long, brown hair and pupil-less white eyes. "She's right, Lee," the other male said. "That was reckless." The now identified Lee just sighed and answered, "I know, but..." Lee's eyes traveled over towards Sakura, and Naruto immediately took notice of how the boy's face took on a distinctly redder hue. Like lightning, Lee was standing in front of the pin-haired Kunoichi, and Naruto finally got a real look at his competition. Lee was average height, and the only disruptions in his green suit were the headband tied around his waist and the orange leg warmers on his ankles. The genin also had bandages wrapped around his hands. Underneath the tight spandex, Naruto could clearly see muscle, not as big as his own, but they were defined. Lee was definitely the type that hit hard. Traveling upwards, Naruto got a shock. Lee had some of the biggest eyebrows he'd ever seen, and to top it off, the kid's onyx black hair was shaped into a bowl cut. The blonde Uzumaki watched as Lee gave his female teammate a thumbs up and a smile. Naruto had a sinking feeling in his gut, like he'd seen this somewhere before, and sure enough, "You are the brilliant Kunoichi, Sakura Haruno, correct?" Sakura just gave the spandex-wearing genin an odd look before replying, Yeah, who are you?" If possible, Lee's smile got wider as he introduced himself. "My name is Rock Lee. Sakura, please be my girlfriend. I promise to protect you with my life." Naruto facepalmed. That's why it seemed familiar. Peeking through his fingers, a lone blue eye took in the rest of the scene. Sakura's brow twitched, and her mouth hung open for a moment before she finally found the words to say, No thanks. Why, you're too much of a weirdo." Lee's expression immediately took a dive. Where there was once a bright smile, now there was a deep frown, and it looked as if he were going to cry. However, before he could plead his case any further, Sasuke stepped in and said, "Sakura, enough, let's go." "He's right, Lee, we need to dash," the bun-haired girl started to say. But then her chocolate-brown eyes landed on Naruto, or more specifically his sword, and she swiftly strode over towards him. Naruto looked at the Kunoichi warily. She had a deeply concentrated look on her face, and her brow was heavily furrowed. Can I help you with something?" "Yeah, you can. You can tell me how you managed to get a hold of the Kubikirabocho. That's one of the Mist's legendary swords, and they're only given to members of the Seven Swordsmen of Mist, so I'd love to know how a Leaf Genin got his hands on it. Naruto's eyes immediately hardened at the reminder of Zabuza's death, but in the back of his mind a question formed. Who were these seven swordsmen? Kakashi had mentioned them back in Wave, but Naruto hadn't any real idea of who they were. Filing those away for later, maybe Kakashi-sensei would offer an explanation. The blonde turned his attention back to the kunoichi in front of him. Her expectant look irritated him. It was like she was demanding answers, as if she had a right to know. You know what? Naruto finally replied. You can just keep wondering, because as far as I'm concerned that information's on a need-to-know basis. As in, you don't need to know. Come on guys with that. The young swordsman began walking away with his team. Or at least they would have if another voice didn't stop them. Hey you, Mr. Rude. What's your name? Team 7 turned around again, this time to be met with the sight of the long-haired boy. He, like Naruto, wore a hoodie and cargos, although his were cream and brown respectively. Around his forehead was a brown headpiece, and one arm and leg were wrapped in bandages. Naruto quickly realized that the kid was a Hyuga by his eyes. Sasuke, thinking the genin was talking to him, stepped forward to introduce himself. You know, it's common courtesy to give your own name before asking someone for theirs. The Hyuga glanced at Sasuke. I wasn't talking to you, then turned his gaze towards Naruto. I meant your teammate. Naruto folded his arms and replied, but my teammate has a point, and I thought Hyugas were all about manners and propriety. Guess you missed those lessons, huh? Both Team 7 and Lee's team watched as the Hyuga boy's eyes hardened into a deadly glare. However, the young genin simply ground out a response. My name is Neji Hyuga. And you? I am Naruto Uzumaki, heir to the demon of Kirigakure. The blonde noticed out of the corner of his eye the looks his teammates were giving him, but he chose to ignore them and focused on the challenge in front. Neji scoffed, as if the title meant nothing, but didn't say anything else. He just turned and began to walk away. Naruto and his own team followed the Hyuga's lead and decided to make their way towards the exam room. On their way there, Sakura turned to Naruto and asked, What was that back there? Heir to the demon. Since when the heck did you start calling yourself that? It's not something you need to worry about, Sakura, so don't ask. XXX. Team 7 were passing through the area of the school where taijutsu practice took place if it rained. As they moved, a voice called out to them from the upper level. Hey you with the attitude. The trio stopped again. Naruto was beginning to get frustrated with all these interruptions. If they were late, somebody was going to get an earful. He and his squad looked up towards where the voice came from and were met with Lee and the bun-haired girl looking down at them. Instead of anyone answering, the members of Squad 7 just waited until someone was clearly addressed. It didn't take long, as the rival genin leaped from the platform and down in front of the trio. Lee was the one to speak. You are Sasuke Uchiha, correct? Said Uchiha, eyed the oddly dressed genin coolly and replied, Yeah. What of it? I have heard that you were this year's Rookie of the Year. Is that true? And if it is? Sasuke asked. Lee's eyes glinted with something as he answered, Then I ask that you and I have a match. Sasuke laughed to himself before saying, You know who I am, what clan I come from, and yet you still want to fight me? Yes, I wish to test a theory, and I believe facing you will give me the answers I seek. The Uchiha looked ready to agree, but his pink-haired teammate chose to speak up in concern. Sasuke-kun, I don't think that's such a good idea. We've only got 30 minutes left before the exams start. As he moved into his taijutsu stance, Sasuke just scoffed, saying, Faye, this won't take more than 5 seconds, Sakura. While this was going on, Naruto noticed that the girl had been giving him a cold look the entire time. Finally, sick of her glaring, the blonde turned to her and said, Why don't you take a picture? It'll last longer. This only served to harden the girl's glare as she scoffed out a reply. Originally, I wasn't going to follow Lee, but then I got to thinking, if he was coming to challenge the Uchiha, then he'd be running into you. Yeah, and I want to fight you. Blue eyes widened in shock as Naruto asked, why? To see if you're worthy of handling such a famous sword, demon's heir. She mocked, a smug grin finding its way onto her face. The girl noticed immediately that she'd struck a nerve, as Naruto's entire body tensed in response to her taunting. I assume there's rules to this battle, he spit through grinding teeth. The bun-haired girl smirked and answered, only one. Strictly Kenjutsu. This confused Naruto as he quickly noticed that the girl was unarmed. She seemed to notice his discontent because the kunoichi reached into her weapon pouch and produced a scroll. As she unfurled it, she assured him, oh, don't worry, I always come prepared. Naruto watched as, out of a cloud of smoke, a katana appeared. This girl could use basic sealing. Interesting. The blonde then watched as his opponent moved away from him and entered into a Kenjutsu stance. Naruto recognized as the Saigen no Kami. Naruto pulled Kubikirabocho from the strap on his back and entered into his own stance. The blade tip rested on the floor, and both his hands held the handle. With his short height, the blonde knew he looked funny with such a large sword, but he hoped his new look helped make up for it. Ten, the girl suddenly said. Her opponent raised a brow in confusion, so she elaborated. My name, it's Ten. I want you to know the name of the person that beat you after this is all over. Ten's snarky explanation sparked Naruto's ire, and his muscles flexed with the desire to pummel the girl into the ground for her constant disrespect, but instead he simply growled out a response. Whenever you're ready to try, I'm ready to put you in your place. Pushing off her right foot, Ten rushed her male opponent. One could see the confidence in her eyes as she moved. She believed she'd already won the match. As she got within range, the brunette thrust her katana forward and hit empty air. As Ten got close, Naruto's sharp eyes watched his slower opponent move to strike. Quick as a flash, the blonde ran the blade of his own weapon into the ground and used the handle to spring himself up and over the bun-haired girl. Once he was behind her, Naruto heaved the giant blade out of the wooden floor and sent it swinging back so the flat of the sword would make contact with Ten's blind spot. Only her training with Gai-sensei saved the girl from being hammered, as she used her speed to evade the slower attack. Ten ducked the blow, then aimed to pierce Naruto's thigh, but missed again when her attack was deflected by the blonde's ankle. The strong material of his sandal enough to stop a glancing blow. Unfortunately, she was wide open for the kick that landed against her chest and sent her rolling back. Coming to a stop, Ten pulled herself back up to her feet and angled the blade parallel to her face. The tip pointed towards Naruto. However, she never got within striking distance this time because she was forced to block a swipe from the Kubikirabocho that otherwise would have sliced her in half. Ten's feet couldn't hold their ground though under the unanticipated strength of the blow, so she skid across the floor before she managed to channel chakra to her feet and stop herself. But Naruto wasn't done. As soon as his opponent stopped moving, the blonde lifted his sword into the air and then brought it down in a crushing blow. The bun-haired brunette managed to block this strike as well, but the power knocked her to the ground. She held herself up on one knee, her face contorted in effort. As he continued to push, Naruto explained their positions. While you may have more experience than me, and no more forms, I make up for that with my superior speed and strength. You're too slow to get inside my guard, and too weak to handle my attacks. Maybe next time you'll think before insulting me. The rest of the world doesn't know it yet, but I will become the next demon of the mist, and there's no way someone like you is going to stop me. With that, in a surprising burst of speed, Naruto swung his sword down then up, and knocked its flat side against Ten's chin. The girl's feet left the ground, blood and spit flew into the air, and she slammed into the wooden floor with a thump. Lee was by his teammate's side in an instant, helping her to sit up and checking on the girl's well-being. Are you all right, Ten? Are you hurt? I'm fine, the young kunoichi snapped. She sent a glare over in Naruto's direction. Naruto just scoffed, Faye, don't get your panties in a twist. You can't really believe that I just carry this around to look cool. I respect the Kubikiribocho, as well as the man who wielded it, and it'd be a dishonor to both if I let the sword go to waste. Tenten just huffed, but silently felt her respect of Naruto rise at his response, before turning away from the blonde, and asked Lee if he'd gotten his match with Sasuke. The bull-haired genin answered no, and that they'd been watching her match with Naruto. Well, you've still got time, Naruto intervened. My match didn't take very long. Looks like only a little over a minute. You and Sasuke can still fight. Lee looked back toward his opponent, and when Sasuke nodded in agreement, they both moved to face off. The spandex-wearing shinobi entered into a taijutsu that Naruto hadn't seen before. One hand behind his back in a fist, the other out in front. Sasuke entered his family taijutsu's first stance, then rushed his opponent. Much like Tenten, Sasuke believed that he'd win the match by overwhelming his opponent with what he thought was superior speed and skill. Once he was in range, the Uchiha opened with a roundhouse kick. But when Lee ducked that, Sasuke tried to follow up with a jab to the face. Lee parried it. After knocking aside Sasuke's jab, Lee decided to go on the offensive. He struck out with his own jab. Unlike with the raven-haired Uchiha, this punch connected, as well as the one that followed to the gut. Lee's punch had so much power, the attack sent Sasuke skidding across the floor. As Sakura rushed to his side, asking if he was okay, Naruto looked at Lee in amazement. He'd watched the fight from the beginning. Sasuke's moves were easy to follow because they were predictable, but when Lee moved, Naruto could barely follow it. The kid was so fast. One thing the blonde noticed, that he knew Sakura hadn't, was that Sasuke had tried to block the two punches. He had shifted his body, ready for them, but the attacks connected before he could do anything else. Seeing Sasuke back on his feet, Naruto watched his teammate as he activated the Sharingan. The blonde saw the confident smirk on the Uchiha's face, but it didn't give Naruto any new sort of hope. He didn't believe the dojutsu would save his teammate. And he was right. Triple X. Team 7 was shocked when they reached room 301 and saw their Jounin instructor waiting for them. Kakashi looked over his team as they came closer and inspected them for any signs of nervousness. He found none, but what he did see quickly caught his interest. Sasuke was sporting some interesting bruises on his face. "What happened?" he asked. The Uchiha didn't say anything. He simply huffed and looked away, and while Sakura attempted to console her love interest, Naruto took it upon himself to explain. "The jerk got his butt kicked by your rival student." Sakura immediately turned a harsh eye in the blonde's direction and seethed. "Be quiet, dummy. Sasuke-kun did not get his butt kicked. That guy just surprised him is all. Next time Sasuke-kun will be ready for him, and then he'll be toast."
Ah, yeah, Imsura.
Sasuke may be able to use that excuse for the start of the match, but what about the second round? After he activated his eyes, Lee still trounced him. The Uchiha in question seemed to have had enough of being made a fool of, because he eyed the blonde dangerously. "Shut up, loser, what do you know? You got off with fighting that weak girl who only used kenjutsu." "Wait!" Kakashi stepped in. "Are you seriously saying you three ran into Guy's students?" "Yeah, that's why I mentioned the whole rival thing, sensei," Naruto answered, before a thought came to mind. "Oh, by the way, can you tell me who the 7 swordsmen are?" The blonde's question clearly surprised the silver-haired shinobi, as evident by his widened eye, but the man just asked, "I can tell you later, sure, but where'd you hear about them from?" "Guy's student, Tenten. She mentioned them to me when we met in the hall." What? How come?" Kakashi balked curiously. What had his genin gotten themselves into? Here, Naruto's face molded into a scowl as he replied. "She got in my face about having Zabuza's sword, saying how I wasn't worthy of it. She challenged me to a match, but I beat her pretty easily." Kakashi sighed before he said, "Well, like I said, I'll tell you what I know after the first exam is over. But for now, I think it's best you three get in there. Wouldn't want to be late after all." He ended with an eye smile. Isn't that the pot calling the kettle black? Sakura mumbled as they made their way inside. Triple X. The minute they stepped through the door, Naruto and his team were momentarily overwhelmed at how many ninja were inside room 301. It was a full house. Shinobi from every corner of the continent seemed to be there. Suna, Taki, Aim, and Kusa, just to name a few. And they all looked on edge. Well, I was too after I entered into a different country and was surrounded by strangers, Naruto thought to himself. Then, a high-pitched voice caught his attention and the blonde turned to find the source. Sasuke-kun, it's so great to see you again. A platinum blonde kunoichi in purple cried out as she glomped the raven-haired youth. I'll bet you missed me, huh? Having to spend all that time with forehead and… Hey, where's Naruto Baka? I'm right here, Ino, the Nine-Tails Jinchurikian sword. The girl, Ino, looked over in her fellow blonde's direction, and her mouth dropped open at the sight that greeted her. He has more muscles than Sasuke-kun. Hey Ino, what's got you so speechless? I thought for sure you'd be all loud the minute you saw Sasuke. Another voice called. This one belonged to a ponytailed boy wearing a green vest, black pants, and a mesh shirt. He was followed by another boy. This one was short but large and was carrying a bag of chips. He had light brown hair that was tied down by his headband. I think it had something to do with me, Shikamaru, Naruto told his fellow genin. When the now-named Nara heir turned his eyes, his reaction was similar to Ino's. Only the male genin managed to pull himself together and asked Naruto about his new look. It's a long story, and I know how much you hate those Shikamaru, was the blonde's reply. Ha! He can change his look all he wants. It still won't save him from me and Akamaru, boasted a new voice. This one belonged Kiba, who had his Ninken Akamaru riding atop his head. He was followed by Hinata and his second teammate Shino. Much of Shino's body was covered by a long coat, the collar even hiding much of his face. But one could clearly see the pale skin of his face from the little bit shown. Shino was also the tallest rookie, with a head of wild dark brown hair. I'd be careful, Kiba. This isn't the academy. Your placement isn't based on some stupid paper test. Out here it's all about skill. Naruto replied coldly. He'd never liked Kiba. The Inuzuka was always one of the first to put down his dream, and the boy was far too full of himself. Even by Naruto's standards. But before Kiba could make a retort, a soft voice interrupted from behind him. Oh, don't mind Kiba. He's just anxious to start the exams. Naruto's blue eyes looked over Kiba's shoulder and spotted a petite girl wearing a heavy coat. His face broke out into a smile when he recognized the only girl to ever be nice to him in school, and he greeted her warmly. Hey Hinata, I almost didn't see you there. Good to know you'll be taking the exams too. He watched as the Hyuga girl ducked her head upon being greeted, and so he missed the redness that crept into her cheeks. The blonde just raised a brow in confusion before Ino's voice bellowed. Am I the only one who cares that Naruto Baka went from scrawny shrimp to tanned and toned? Yes, Ino, you are. It's too much of a drag to hear his long story, relayed Shikamaru in a bored tone. Besides, the guy probably doesn't want anyone here knowing his secrets anyway, right? All the rookies looked for the new voice and saw that it came from a lanky teen that was walking over towards them. He wore a high-collared, purple shirt and khaki pants. His hands were covered by fingerless gloves, while on his face sat a pair of glasses. The guy's head was covered in a shock of silver hair that was mostly tied back by a ponytail. Naruto eyed the new guy warily. That's right, mister. The teen looked sheepish as he answered the blonde's question. Oh, my name is Kabuto Yakushi. And is there something we can help you with, Kabuto-san? Sasuke asked. Kabuto just smiled and replied, Actually, I think there's a way I can help you guys. We Leaf Genin should try to stick together after all, right? That makes sense, Sakura agreed. So Kabuto-san, what kind of help can you give us? From the sound of it, you've taken these exams before, right? That's right. So what, is this like your second try? Asked Ino. She too was becoming curious. And if this guy's hints would help her beat Sakura at being Chunin, then she was all for it. Kabuto ducked his head and mumbled, "Actually, it's my 7th try. The exams are held twice a year." Hearing this bit of news made Naruto curious. Over the months before the exam, he'd been getting more training from Kakashi-sensei, and one of the first lessons was to always look beyond what you see. To not take everything at face value, because as a ninja, that could spell disaster. So Naruto watched Kabuto a little more closely to see if there was any reason to feel suspicious, or if he was just jumpy about the exams. But still, the guy's taken it 7 times, how has he not passed yet? Does he just suck? Naruto kept his eyes trained on Kabuto as the bespectacled genin explained one of his info cards. This one a topographical map of the ninja villages, and how many shinobi each one had competing. This wasn't so odd. The guy probably used the 5 days to compile the data, so Naruto let it slide. Then Sasuke asked if the silver-haired leaf ninja had any information on people. Candidates taking the test. "I have a little something on everyone. Gotta know who you're dealing with, right? Are you wondering about anybody in particular?" Sasuke's eyes focused as he replied, "Rock Lee and Sabaku no Gaara." "Well, that's no fun, you even know their names," Kabuto joked as he pulled 2 cards from his deck. "All right, first up is Rock Lee." A chart phased onto the card, complete with a picture of the oddball genin and his teammates underneath. According to this, Rock Lee and his team are about a year older than you guys, and are trained by the Jounin guy. Lee has an exceptional level of taijutsu mastery, far above your average genin, but the rest of his skills leave much to be desired. His teammates are Tenten and Niji Hyuga, and together they've completed 20 D-rank missions and 5 C-rank. Kabuto explained. There were 2 things that caught Naruto's attention. How did Kabuto know the extent of Lee's skills, as well as the number and rank of the missions his team had taken? Those kinds of things aren't just public knowledge, even to other ninja. But Naruto decided to let Kabuto keep going, because he wanted to know about Gaara as well. Like with Lee's, Gaara's photo and chart phased onto the card. Taking a closer look, Naruto could see the redhead's pie chart that told of his skills was more diverse than Lee's had been, although the taijutsu section was significantly thinner. All right, well, Sabaku no Gaara is a first-timer like all of you, and his team consists of his older siblings Temari and Kankuro. Gaara's physical stats aren't very high, but his ninjutsu is noteworthy, while his other skills are pretty standard. It says here that his team has completed 13 D-rank, 8 C-rank, and, get this, a B-rank mission. Kabuto's eyes widened behind his glasses as he read the mission log. "What? No way he's done a B-rank if he's the same age as us," cried Kiba in disbelief. He and his team had only performed 2 C-rank since they'd been together. But Kabuto just shook his head and replied, "It's true, but that's not even the most surprising part. It says here that not only has he done those missions, but Gaara has also never been injured while undertaking them." Many of the genin's eyes nearly fell out of their heads at that bit of news. A genin performing a B-rank without getting touched? There weren't Chunin or even many Jounin that got away with no injury. So how did this kid? However, one genin's eyes didn't widen, but narrowed, as he looked upon the scene. Naruto's senses were on fire with alarm. That kind of knowledge couldn't have been learned inside the village. And there's no way this guy was old enough to be issued a bingo book which would probably label Gaara as a C-rank threat. So how did Kabuto know those things? This just proves that there's something funny about this guy, knowing a foreign team's mission history while you're just a genin, not a chance. However, he didn't call the silver-haired youth out on it, because he didn't know just who this Kabuto Yakushi really was. But he'd find out. Then, Naruto's eye caught a glimpse of something, and the blonde slightly turned his head to see what it was. A team of genin were moving through the crowd, and from the looks of it, Kabuto was their target. But before Naruto could call out a warning, Kabuto moved and evaded the initial strike. Well, at least I know he's no slouch. Yet just as he thought this, Kabuto dropped to his knees and vomited on the floor. Blue eyes doubled in size as Naruto wondered what happened. The bespectacled genin made a clean dodge. So what hit him? Then a cocky voice echoed through the room, drawing the blonde's attention. Why don't you put this on one of your little cards? The Sound Village is gonna dominate this whole exam. You Leaf Ninja don't stand a chance. Naruto eyed the shinobi that had spoken. He wasn't the one that attacked Kabuto, but the Jinchuriki didn't like him. He was annoying. The guy had a head of wild, spiky hair similar to Kakashi-sensei's, and he wore a baggy, tan shirt with the kanji for death written on it with gray camo pants and scarf. Before Naruto could take a look at the other two Sound Ninja though, a collection of smoke clouds appeared around the room. When they all faded, the large crop of genin were surrounded by several Chunin rank Leaf Shinobi. Naruto recognized Kotetsu and Izumo among the ranks. And standing in front of the chalkboard was a large man in a navy blue trench coat and his headband worn like a bandana. The guy had scars etched across his face and harsh, black eyes. "All right, that's enough," he yelled in a guttural voice. "You three genin from Odo better settle down, before I have you thrown out on your asses." The spiky-haired loudmouth gave the older man a disrespectful look and snarked, "Yeah? Well, who the hell are you to tell us what to do?" Scarface just smirked, a twisted look that promised suffering for those that crossed him. "I am Ibiki Marino, proctor of the first exam, and from this moment on your worst nightmare. XXX. Every genin in the room looked to the man that had introduced himself as their proctor. Some looked at him in fear, while others looked at him with indifference. Too bad for him. I'm not afraid of dreams. Naruto fell into the latter category. Now, before I begin to explain the rules of the first exam to you all, I need everyone to form a line and pull a slip from this box. The number on the paper corresponds with one of the seats in this room. That seat is where you'll be sitting for the written exam, Ibiki explained. And almost immediately after those words, Naruto's mask of indifference slipped just enough that one could see him flinch. A written test, seriously? They had to give me the one thing I'm not good at first? Although he'd begun studying, Naruto knew better than to consider himself a star student. He still didn't even consider himself average. All the blonde had managed to do was gain basic knowledge about several of the different subjects covered at his village's library, and he didn't think one of the questions was going to be, who are the legendary Sannin? So with a nervous feeling swirling around in his stomach, Naruto found a place in line. As he did though, the young Jinchuriki made sure to keep up his aloof facade, so as not to give anything away to his competition. But this made it so he didn't notice the red-haired girl behind him. However, she noticed him. Karen looked at the blonde boy in front of her curiously. She'd seen him watching her as her team passed the blonde upon entering the village, but she didn't let him know. Out of the corner of her eye, Karen saw the boy stop for a moment to watch her, and she also saw the look on his face. It was brief, but Karen could swear she saw interest in his ocean blue orbs. But what's so interesting about me? Back in her home village of Kusagakure, Karen was nothing special. Just another headband in the crowd. And while she had a brilliant mind, the people of her village didn't care so much about that as they did strength. Something Karen was in short supply of. It frustrated the bespectacled girl because she had so much more to give, with her brain and her ability as a medical ninja. Why couldn't her village see that? So Karen asked her Jounin instructor to enter the team into the Chunin exams, in hopes of passing and moving up in rank, so that then she could stand out among her fellow Kusa shinobi. When she looked back up from the floor, Karen was startled to see that, instead of the blonde boy, it was now a Chunin guard in front of her. "It's your turn, girl. Pick a number and go sit down," he demanded roughly. "Yeah. Hurry it up already. We ain't got all day, you know." Another examiner's shout came from behind. Karen blushed lightly in embarrassment and quickly pulled a slip of paper from the box. Looking at the numbers, the redhead just as quickly shuffled out of line to find her seat. Seeing what row she was in, Karen's crimson eyes searched for a mop of blonde hair, and downcast in disappointment when she saw none. "And here I was hoping we could talk." Triple X. Naruto sat down in his assigned seat, his blade having been confiscated due to its size. As the Uzumaki steepled his fingers in front of his face, a flash of color caught his eye and made him look to his right. "Oh, hey Hinata, how's it going?" Indeed, Naruto's tablemate was the Hyuga heiress, and upon being addressed, the young girl's face flushed a light pink. As the flustered girl sat in her own seat, she replied to Naruto's greeting, "Oh, hi Naruto-kun. I am okay. What about you? Are you ready for the test?" Naruto smirked, and his voice cheerful. "You bet, this'll be easy." Hinata just smiled shyly in the blonde's direction, her silent fear of doing poorly being assuaged by her idol's exuberant confidence. In short order, they were soon given their tests, face down, and told not to turn them over until after the proctor had explained all the rules. "All right, everybody listen up," Ibiki called out from the front of the room. "As I've already mentioned, this is a written exam, but it will be unlike any other test you may have taken back in the academy. However, before I explain why, let me tell you right now, no questions until after I've explained everything." This got the Jounin more than a few cross looks. No questions? What kind of examiners does that? However, none of the genin decided to voice their displeasure and settled on glaring at the scarred man. Ibiki was just fine with that. Now, as I said, this test will be different. The first and most major difference comes in the fact that your score will be determined by the combined numbers between you and your squad dash. "What?" Sakura interrupted in horror. "Quiet. Didn't I just say no questions?" Now, as I was saying, your entire team must score altogether a total of 9 points. Each question is 1 point apiece, meaning that all it takes is one person scoring high enough for your team to pass. However, should just one member of the team get a 0, then the entire team fails. Ibiki had to hold in his laughter as he watched the pink-haired girl that interrupted him slam her head on the desk. Naruto's eyebrow twitched incessantly at that bit of news, but didn't let it distract him from listening to the rest of the rules. Ibiki then went on to explain that the 10th and final question would be given out 10 minutes before their hour was up. Also, the Chunin were there to catch anyone who was cheating, and 2 points would be deducted for every incident. If you are foolish enough to be caught cheating by the Sentinels, then you don't deserve to be here. So show us what exceptional shinobi you can be. And with that, Ibiki announced that the test had begun. The moment he flipped his paper over, Naruto knew he was in trouble. The first question asked him to break some kind of code, and that would have been easy had he not gotten kicked out of class so often. He tried, Naruto really did, but he just didn't have enough knowledge on the subject to crack it. From there, it only got worse. Naruto decided to skip the question and try to find one he could answer. Unfortunately, it seemed like the code breaking was the easiest one, because from there the questions wanted complex math and theoretical problem solving. All things Naruto wasn't very good at. Damn it! What am I going to do? If I don't get at least one question right, then my whole team fails. But how was he expected to answer questions about things that weren't covered in the academy? Thinking back to his days in school also made the frustrated genin think about the written tests he took there. Ibiki had made sure to mention that the two were different, and then went on to explain the grading system. But that wasn't the only difference, Naruto realized. The proctor had said that was the first difference, not the only one. And this made the spiky-haired genin think about the point deduction system. Back in school, kids caught cheating failed immediately. So why only deduct points now, during such an important test? This made Naruto think of the last thing the scarred Jounin said before starting the test, about how anyone foolish enough to be caught cheating wasn't fit to be at the exams. And that's when Naruto realized the truth. He was supposed to cheat. The test wasn't about having all the answers, but about being able to steal them without getting caught. It was like a mission, one that required stealth and cunning. At this, Naruto relaxed. Stealth was something he had been training in all month since he'd been back. But using the hidden mist jutsu was too obvious. There's no way I could get away with that in here. I'll have to try something else. With that thought in mind, Naruto let just his eyes wander slowly around the room, trying to see how other genin were getting the answers. Hinata was using her Byakugan, keeping her head low so that her hair covered the telltale veins unless you were as close as Naruto was. He could see Kiba, who was sitting ahead and a few rows to his left, getting answers from Akamaru, who was perched atop his head. Man, I wish I had a partner like that, the fledgling demon mused as he finished looking around the room. Shikamaru was sleeping, no surprise there, but Choji was writing down answers. The thing was, Naruto didn't see the boy using any method of cheating, which confused him as the blonde knew Choji wasn't smart enough to handle the test's questions. Deciding that it wasn't important, as it had nothing to do with him passing the test, Naruto pushed those thoughts away and continued to think of a way he could get the answers he needed. But before he could, the young genin leaned his head to the side, so as to avoid a kunai that sailed through the air. With a thunk, the sharpened weapon dug into the table behind him, and Ibiki's voice called out, "Number 5-3 failed. Numbers 73 and 22 are dismissed as well. Triple X." Karen watched as the trio of genin were tossed out of the room kicking and screaming, each one bellowing about being treated unfairly, and how they didn't cheat. But Karen saw him, her pupil-less crimson eyes were sharp, and she'd caught number 53 5 times. Meaning the Chunin definitely saw him. She had finished the test after the first 10 minutes and now was just waiting for the 10th question. This was where her brilliance showed. The questions were easy for someone like her. Unfortunately, she couldn't say the same for her teammates. Karen had flipped her paper over, signaling that she had finished, and had carefully eyed both males on her team. They were both trying to cheat. Karen sighed when she saw this. She tried multiple times to teach her squad about the theories and mathematics required for the test questions, but they just laughed in her face, brushing her aside and saying that none of it would help any out in the field. This was why she wanted to become Chunin, so that no one would ever put down her ideas and strategies again. Triple X. The smirk on Naruto's face was one that used to spell doom for anyone he decided to prank. But now, the bandaged genins looked told of a different kind of trick. He'd found a way to get his answers. And I won't even have to move from this spot. Naruto's left hand covertly formed into the same hand sign he used when activating the hidden mist jutsu. Then the blonde closed his eyes and concentrated. High up above, beyond the sight of the sentinels, a small fog swirled near the ceiling. The mist moved like this for another minute, water particles in the air continuing to gather towards it, before finally a cloud the size of a plate hung in the air. But Naruto wasn't finished yet. Next, he imagined the cloud reforming into just a plain puddle of water, but in a flat and oval shape. A tick in the blonde's mind let him know it had finished. With that, Naruto acted as if he needed to stretch, and when he opened his eyes, a liquid mirror was reflecting the image of Hinata's paper. Answers and all. Ha, I did it. I wasn't really sure that would work since I'd never tried it before, but I figure it's the same as making a dragon out of water. You just gotta think of the shape in your mind. With his plan a success, Naruto went to work copying every answer he could see, until finally, he had all 9 answers written down. Even if some of them were wrong, all he needed was one. Now all he had to do was worry about the 10th question. Looking over at the clock, Naruto saw that he still had 10 minutes left until Ibiki would call time. After flipping his paper over, seeing the blank space reminded the blonde of Kabuto's cards. I should have Ibiki-san report him to the old man. That 10 minutes passed quickly, and before he knew it, Naruto's ears were assaulted by Ibiki's gruff voice as it echoed throughout the room. All right, time's up. It's time for the 10th question. Naruto flipped his test paper over and eyed Ibiki as the man got ready to give out the final question. But when he saw the man's eyes gleam with a haughty light, the spiky-haired Jinchuriki knew that what was coming was more than just some test question. Once he saw that everyone was paying attention, Ibiki began to speak. Now that everyone's ready, let me explain how this is going to work. Each of you has a choice of whether or not to be given the 10th question. It's not mandatory. Seeing looks of confusion, but also of hope, the Jounin decided to make everything clear. However, if you choose not to be given the 10th question, then the other 9 are invalid and you will be asked to leave. What? Kiba cried out as he stood from his chair. What kind of stupid rule is that? Of course we'll take the question then. Many of the other genin nodded or voiced their agreement. Ibiki chuckled darkly to himself before replying, "Oh, but wait, you didn't let me finish. For you see, for all those who choose to be given the final question and get it wrong, they fail, regardless of their previous scores." This was swiftly met with cries of anger and indignation, but Ibiki quickly shut them up and continued to explain the rules. "Enough interruptions. The next person to talk before I've finished giving instructions will be thrown out along with her team. Now, as I was saying, failing the final question not only ends the exams for you now but also for the rest of your life. You will never be allowed to take it again. So those are your choices. Play it safe and quit, or make an attempt that could lead to utter failure." Naruto watched as, after the rules were given, several hands began to raise into the air and genin voicing their desire to quit. The number of shinobi seemed to drop like flies as 3 at a time the room emptied out. As he turned to get a better look around though, Hinata caught his attention. Hinata had her head down, and her shoulders were slumped. The young heiress was shaking like a leaf and Naruto could see her wide, unblinking eyes as they swam with fear. Looking down at her hands, Naruto saw that one clutched her pant leg with bone-crushing terror, while the other trembled, hovering as if she were about to raise it. She was going to quit. "Hinata-san." Naruto eyed the girl with disbelief. She was really going to give up? This was only the first test. But then the blonde remembered that the kunoichi sitting next to him was never good at being pressured. She didn't like being put on the spot, and tended to fall under the weight of the moment. So, with what he hoped was humor in his voice, Naruto leaned over and spoke quietly in Hinata's ear. "Man, can you believe these guys? What a bunch of wimps. I mean, it's only the first exam and they're already quitting. But I guess everyone can't be as great as you and me, huh? I bet after this, the rest of the exams will be a cakewalk." He saw how once he spoke, Hinata's trembling stopped. She jerked from the sudden interaction, but the young girl remained stagnant, never looking over at Naruto. But she didn't have to, because he'd seen the change in her eyes. Where once there was fear and a desire to run away, now in its place was a small light of determination that burned like a candle. "Let's just hope it doesn't flicker out during the second test, because I may not be there to relight it," Naruto thought to himself as he pulled away. With his fellow rookie safe for the moment, the blonde Jinchuriki turned his attention back towards the front of the room and saw the proctor smiling. By now, it seemed as if all who were going to give up had done so. As he looked out over the remaining crowd, Ibiki counted 45 individual genin. 15 teams had passed the first exam. Smiling in satisfaction at a job well done, Ibiki cleared his throat and addressed the remaining candidates. "Is that all who want to quit?" When he didn't see any more scared faces, he continued, "Very well then. For all of you who have remained, congratulations, you've passed the first stage of the Chunin exams." This was met with the expected response: disbelief. Many of the remaining shinobi squawked about how twisted Ibiki was, while others asked about the point of the 10th question. Ibiki went on to explain that there was no real 10th question. It was another test. From there, he confirmed what many of the test takers knew, that the real objective was to cheat without being seen, and that during a mission to gather information, it's the team's job as a whole to succeed. Which was why they were scored together, and the single 0 represented a teammate's death. Then he explained the final test. The 10th question was a way to gauge who was truly ready to be a shinobi, someone willing to risk everything for the sake of their village. Because when your Kage gives you a mission, you don't back out of it, you accept it with the understanding that it is being done to further ensure the safety of your home. Any unwilling to put their village first didn't even deserve to wear their headband. But seeing as you all have stayed, it means that on some level you already understood this, and for that, your village's Ibiki's speech was cut short though when the window to his right burst open in a shower of glass, and a large ball of cloth hurtled its way inside. The bundle exploded in the front of the room and became a display, hung up by kunai that dug into the floor and ceiling. All the genin looked on at the purple tarp that read, Second Chunin Exam Proctor, Anko Mitarashi, is here. Only Naruto's face broke out into an expectant look. Seconds later, another ball rolled through the window, only this time when it unfurled it was a person. Anko stood in front of her banner, hands on her hips, and a smirk on her face. All right, you brats, you've had it easy until now. My name is Anko Mitarashi, and I'm the proctor for the exam that's going to either toughen you up or tear you down. Her entrance was met with a silence so profound one could practically hear the wind as it sailed lazily in through the broken window. Ibiki stepped out from around the large banner and grouched, Anko, you're early. Again. Anko's face broke into an embarrassed scowl at her fellow Jounin's words, but it was quickly morphed into a look of curiosity when she heard the sound of someone clapping. It was slow, and when Anko looked around the room, she saw that it was coming from Naruto. The blonde had a brow raised in amusement, but she couldn't see much else because of the bandages around his face. But it was enough for the purple-haired special Jounin. A wide smile found its way past the confused stare as Anko addressed the young Uzumaki. Hey Gaki, glad to see you passed the test. His applause coming to a stop, Naruto replied, Thanks, it wasn't too hard though honestly. I hope your test gives me more of a challenge, Anko. The woman in question just gave a knowing grin and told Naruto to be careful what he wished for. Then she noticed how many genin were left, and her face dropped into an annoyed pout. Ibiki, what's this? 45 genin? You really did go easy on them this time, huh? Ibiki just chuckled. Or maybe we just have a stronger crop of candidates this time around. Yeah, right, was Anko's answer to that. Okay, now that introductions are out of the way, I want all of you to meet me at training ground number 44 tomorrow at 8 a.m. sharp. With her instructions given, the grinning Kunoichi disappeared via Shunshin, leaving Ibiki to dismiss the remaining teams. Once all the remaining teams were ushered out of the testing room, Ibiki went around to collect all the papers. As he went, he noticed that some had managed to answer all the questions, while some could only get answers to about half. It made the interrogation expert laugh when he saw that Sabaku Nogara only answered a single question. It was when he got to the Uzumaki kids test that his brow furrowed. While it wasn't uncommon for genin to doodle on the back of their paper, it was uncommon for them to leave messages for the proctor to read. Ibiki-san, I left this note because wanted to ask a favor from you. I'd like for you to inform the Hokage about a genin I thought was suspicious. His name is Kabuto Yakushi. Although he may be a leaf ninja, I just get an odd feeling from him. Kabuto-san had information on other candidates from a different village that doesn't seem like it'd be accessible to someone outside that village's walls. I may be wrong in my suspicions, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. The scarred man's face was set in a grim frown. It was dangerous to accuse a fellow shinobi of treachery without real evidence. But if what this kid said was true, then there may be more to Kabuto Yakushi than meets the eye. Ibiki remembered that the shinobi in question had taken the exams a handful of times already, always making it past the second phase, but giving up afterwards out of exhaustion. No one thought anything of it before, but now Ibiki wondered if perhaps there was a reason behind it now. Perhaps the young man was looking for something and had yet to find it. The question is, what? XXX. Naruto and his team met up with their Jounin instructor outside the academy building, along with the other rookie teams. I see your team managed to pull through Kakashi. I must say I'm a bit surprised, Kurenai commented as she eyed her fellow Jounin. Kakashi just smiled and said, Well, I'm not. I knew they had it in them. So, Kakashi, when did you start teaching Kenjutsu? Asuma questioned as his eyes landed on Naruto. Then, when he realized just what blade was strapped to the blonde's back, his eyes widened. And how did Naruto get his hands on the sword that belonged to Zabuza Momochi? It's a long story, the cycloptic Jounin sighed. One that isn't really mine to tell anyway. If you want to know, ask Naruto. As for your first question, I haven't. It's something the kid picked up on his own. Naruto could see the curiosity in the other Jounin's eyes, but he had no desire to talk about his goal. So instead he turned his attention to Kakashi and reminded the man of his promise. "Hey, Kakashi-sensei, you remember right before I went in to take the first exam, right? You said you'd answer a question for me." The older shinobi saw through his student's facade and could see the blonde's desire to get away from the prying eyes of the other jounin. Deciding to spare Naruto from having to explain something that clearly caused him pain, Kakashi replied, "Oh yeah, you're right. Okay, let's go. Sasuke, Sakura Hill meet you guys tomorrow for the second test." With that, the two ninja walked off, but with their backs turned, they didn't see the narrowed eyes that followed them. Kakashi and Naruto walked silently in the direction of Ichiraku's. They had long since left the academy where the first portion of the Chunin exams had taken place, and the silver-haired jounin decided that the ramen shop's relaxed atmosphere was a great place to tell his curious student the story of Mist's seven swordsmen. The two shinobi sat down at the bar, Naruto ordering 3 bowls of miso ramen while his instructor declined any food. Eager to learn, Naruto turned his eyes on Kakashi and asked, "So Kakashi-sensei, who are these swordsmen that girl Tenten was talking about?" Kakashi turned in his seat, making sure he faced his student as he answered his question, and replied, "The 7 swordsmen are just as their name describes, although they don't all have to be men. Their group is made up of the 7 most powerful kenjutsu users in Kiri." Blue eyes focused on that bit of information. It explains why Zabuza was so strong. And actually, I'd heard Zabuza's generation was known as the strongest Kiri has ever produced. Each member is granted one of 7 swords, which as I mentioned before is relinquished to the one who defeats the previous owner, with every blade having its own unique power. That last part got the blonde's attention, and he ignored the ramen placed in front of him to ask, "What kind of powers? And what's Kubikirabocho's?" "Unfortunately," Kakashi sighed, "I'm not actually sure, Naruto. Usually, anyone outside of the hidden mist that actually see the swords wind up being on the business end of its blade, so their abilities are a pretty well-guarded secret." This made Naruto a little sad. It meant that he didn't know the full extent of his weapon's power, and wouldn't unless he could find someone from Kiri to tell him. The boy's jounin instructor noticed his soured mood, as the blonde took to eating his ramen slowly after unwinding the bandages, and decided to try and cheer him up. "But remember, Naruto, Zabuza didn't use the sword's ability against us, and he was still such a dangerous threat. It's proof that all you need is your own strength and confidence in your own ability to become a powerful shinobi." Kakashi saw that his words had taken root by the way Naruto's demeanor shifted. The boy was no longer slouching. "And speaking of becoming a powerful shinobi, are you ready for the second exam tomorrow, Naruto?" That did it. The blonde looked up with a smirk on his face and a determined look in his blue eyes. "Definitely. I can't wait for today to be over." "That's good," the silver-haired shinobi replied. "Do you think dash?" Chuff, chuff. Whatever else the man was going to say was cut off by a messenger bird flying overhead, signaling for the elite ninja to report to the Hokage's office. Kakashi looked from the bird back to his young charge and apologized, saying that they could catch up after the second test tomorrow. Naruto let his sensei know it was okay, and then went back to his lunch. Once he finished with his ramen, Naruto re-wrapped his face and bid goodbye to the Ichiraku family before idly walking through the streets. As he passed between villagers, the blonde's mind continued to trek back to the secrets of Kiri's group of swordsmen. There had to be a way of finding out more about them. His answer came in the form of a bun-haired kunoichi bumping into him. The blonde Uzumaki managed to keep himself from tumbling, and then reached out quickly to save the other person from falling as well. Naruto's eyes soon locked with a stunned brown pair, ones that he instantly recognized. "Tenten-san, are you all right?" The girl in question stood idle for a moment longer, taking in what just happened, before she frowned. "Yeah, I'm all right, but maybe next time you should pay more attention to where you're going, Uzumaki-san. Oh, and you can let go of me now." For his part, the blonde swordsman managed to look apologetic as he removed his arm from around the girl's waist. Scratching the back of his head nervously, Naruto replied, "You're probably right. sorry. I was just… Hey, wait. You know about the seven swordsmen, right? Tenten eyed the younger boy with curiosity as she said, yes. Do you know a lot about them? The bandaged youth asked. Kakashi-sensei didn't really know much besides the basics, I guess, but he told me about how each sword had a power or ability that made it special. Would you know anything about that? The brunette Kunoichi wasn't sure what she should say. On the one hand, she was still miffed about losing her match to the blonde in front of her, and was considering not telling him what she knew. But then Tenten thought about how, even if she didn't like the kid, he was still a fellow Leaf Shinobi and deserved professional courtesy. I don't know a lot about the organization itself, pretty much just the basics like everyone else that's not a part of it, but I doc know about the swords. After all, I wouldn't be much of a weapon expert if I didn't keep up my knowledge on every type out there. Tenten could see the hopeful look in Naruto's eye and heard it in his voice as he asked her to tell him more. This made the girl start to think. What could I get out of this? After just standing there and staring at the blonde with a scrutinizing look, Tenten finally decided. All right, I'll tell you, but only on one condition. Okay, what? You have to help me track down Kiba. Naruto's face took on a look of confusion. You mean Inuzuka? What do you want with him? Tenten pinched the bridge of her nose as a vein pulsed along her forehead. Not that Kiba. I meant the twin swords Kiba, also known as the Thunder Swords. They belong to Amuri Ringo of the Seven Swordsmen, and it's a dream of mine to own and master them. Naruto's look of confusion melted away and was replaced with one of understanding. Oh, that makes more sense, but I don't understand how I can help you with that. Simple, the weapon user replied. News of Zabuza's death will spread throughout the ninja world, and eventually reach the ears of the other members. They'll get curious about who defeated him and want to find out what happened to Kubi Kiribocho. Leading Amuri to me, the blonde finished. Tenten nodded, motioned for Naruto to walk with her, and continued. Yes, if you really manage to defeat Zabuza, then you must be strong, so if I train with you, I'll be able to go up against Amuri. The demon of the mist was said to be the strongest of the seven. Until Kisame anyway. And who is Kisame? If he was going to be tracked by such high-level ninja, Naruto wanted to cover all his bases, especially if the Kisame guy was even stronger than Zabuza. Originally, Kisame Hashigaki was a member of the Seven Swordsmen's Cipher Division and under the command of Fuguki Suikazan, who was part of Zabuza's generation. However, after an unknown incident, Kisame killed Fuguki and took possession of Samahata. He later became a missing ninja, and like Zabuza, carries his sword with him.
Tenten explained.
Naruto made sure to lock in the names he'd heard. Amuri, Fuguki, Kisame. Because the blonde had a feeling he'd be faced with those names again later. Turning his attention back to the matter at hand though, the blonde asked, and about how much stronger is Kisame compared to Zabuza? The bun-haired girl shook her head. I don't really know. That kind of information isn't really public knowledge, even for shinobi. Maybe your instructor can tell you. They walked quietly for a while, neither one saying a word and simply looking around at the various shops and stands they passed, until Naruto spoke again. So what can you tell me? About the swords, I mean, because if you want me to help you, then you're gonna have to keep your end of the bargain first. I suppose you're right, Tenten agreed. So you want to know about what makes each sword special, right? Well, let's start with yours. Kubikiribocho is the immortal blade, as it can never truly be destroyed. This sword is said to have the ability to reforge itself using the iron in the blood of its victims. Naruto listened with rapt attention, and a single brow rose at the new bit of information he'd received about his weapon. That'll definitely be useful. But the older girl wasn't finished. Next, there's the blades I want to find, Kiba, a pair of double-edged blades. What makes these so special is that they are imbued with lightning, which has given them such an increase in cutting power that they are said to be the sharpest swords in existence. Then you have Nuabari, the sewing needle, a very thin long sword with the appearance of a needle that has a length of wire tied at the hilt, which gives the user the ability to take down numerous opponents at once by sewing them together. Those two swords sounded dangerous to the young blonde. However, Kiba's lightning-laced blades intrigued him. After those two, Tenten continued, you have Kabutawari. This one's a little strange in my opinion, as it's made up of a single-sided axe and a hammer joined together by a thick length of chain. This one has a reputation for being able to break through any form of defense because of how dense and powerful its blows are. Following Kabutawari is Shibuki, the blast sword. Shibuki gets its name from the fact that the blade itself is wrapped in a scroll that contains numerous explosive seals, so that when the sword is swung, even if you block the initial strike, one or more Cs will set off and you'll be caught in the explosion. Explosions, sounds dangerous. The Kabutawari wasn't of much interest to the young blonde, although he did respect and was wary of its reputation. If he ever ran into it, he'd need to be careful. Letting his mind return to Tenten's explanation, Naruto caught her as she began speaking about the last two swords. Okay, almost done. This next one is called Hiramakari, a wide flat blade with double edges and two handles, earning it the nickname Twin Sword. Hiramakari has the ability to store its wielder's chakra, and then be expelled upon command and given shape in the form of any type of weapon. And Samahata? Naruto questioned. You left it for last, so I guess that makes it the most dangerous. Tenten nodded, her eyes turning to look at Naruto for a moment. Yes, it is. Samahata is a large blade that takes on the appearance of shark scales. Because of its shape, this sword doesn't slice or cut. It shaves, leaving any attempt at stitching very unlikely due to the way the damage is inflicted. And even if someone were to survive an encounter with the blade and get away, the wounds would more than likely kill them later, as they wouldn't heal in time. If just its bite is so terrifying, I can't believe what its power is. The Uzumaki balked in wonder. Samahata has the ability to eat an opponent's chakra. It makes the sword stronger. Its wielder never has to worry about being hit by ninjutsu because, with a single swing, or even just thrusting the blade into the attack, will allow Samahata to absorb the technique. Naruto's eyebrows rose up to the edge of his headband. That was a scary bit of news. How does it do that? It's said that the sword has a chakra network of its own, but I'm not really sure, Tenten answered skeptically. Heck, it was hard enough getting that information on it. It took my dad years. From there, the two shinobi got quiet again. Tenten finished with her explanation and Naruto in deep thought about the information he'd just been given. Thinking back on what he now had to do for the kunoichi beside him, Naruto turned his eyes on her. So out of all 7 swords, why decide on using Kiba? Tenten looked over at the blonde walking beside her, her chocolate-brown eyes widening a fraction in surprise. Nobody has ever asked me about that before. Looking down, she answered. It's because Aim Yuri isn't just another ninja. She's a kunoichi, a woman. The 7 swordsmen is almost always made up of nothing but male shinobi, and the military forces of the world are the same way, so there aren't very many famous kunoichi out there. But Aim Yuri managed to become one of them, and not only that, but she's a part of the strongest generation Kiri has ever produced. I just want to make the world see that not just men can be strong. She and the legendary Tsunade Senju are some of my idols. That's why I chose Kiba. Naruto had stopped along with the brunette girl as she wound her tale of Aim Yuri and being a kunoichi. The blonde Uzumaki looked at her with understanding, as he too wanted to stand out and make a name for himself, both wishing to honor those that had come before them. Tenten turned her eyes up, locking gazes with the boy beside her. What about you? Why did you decide to take up Kubikirabocho? From what I've seen, even if it was just a little bit, you don't seem the type who's just doing it for himself. You're right, he replied. I'm not. Zabuza didn't hand the sword down to me, and when I learned the tradition of how they're passed, I almost didn't take it. But then I thought of something. What if I don't, and someone else comes along and pulls the sword from its place by Zabuza's grave? But so what? Why should that matter to you? By this time, Naruto truly took a look around and noticed where they had wandered to. It was the training ground where he'd become a genin. Must have walked farther than I thought. Turning back to the bun-haired Kunoichi, he answered, "Because I came to respect Zabuza." He himself was a man of honor and respect, even if he did have a cold heart. And still, in the end, he showed that behind all the stern and steel that he cared about his partner. He even gave his life to avenge them. When I learned from Kakashi-sensei about the passing of the swords, I realized that, if I didn't take it, someone else would. But they wouldn't use it to honor Zabuza's memory, only to brag and boost their own ego. Throughout the bandaged boy's speech, Tenten listened, enraptured, as his voice filled with passion and respect. This wasn't just some wannabe swordsman who swung their blade around. No, Naruto Uzumaki was a person who cared about and understood his weapon. Someone who went out of their way to make sure that the tool became more than just another piece of tempered metal. "So," she played on, "you took up his sword to honor Zabuza Momochi?" "That's right," Naruto affirmed with a strong nod. "That's good to hear, but wouldn't you make him prouder by surpassing him?" This confused Naruto. "Huh, what do you mean?" "Well, you don't really just want to be a carbon copy of Zabuza, do you? If you really wish to honor his memory, shouldn't you work to surpass him and add to the name Demon of the Mist?" the older girl explained. Then she took a look at the position of the sun, saw it was past noon, and said, "You think on that for a bit. I've got to go. I promised to look after the shop after the test." Naruto waved silently at the retreating Kunoichi as he stood alone in the training field. Or at least he thought he was alone. So that's what this has all been about. XXX. While Naruto was busy talking with Tenten, Kakashi had made his way over to the Academy's administration building, where the Hokage conducted his business. Once he entered the room, the silver-haired Jounin knew right away that this was a serious meeting. Every Jounin in the village is here. And indeed they were, all 65 of them. They all stood in a semicircle around the Hokage, who sat behind a desk with Ibiki Marino at his side. Which means whatever is going on has to do with something Ibiki found. Kakashi was pulled from his observations by the Sandaime, who noticed that the masked man had entered the room. "Ah, Kakashi, you've arrived. Good. Then this meeting can get started." "But Dad, you haven't even told us what the meeting is about." Asuma spoke up from his place in the crowd. At this, Ibiki stepped forward and addressed his fellow Jounin. "That is because Hokage-sama has given me the order to explain what I found to the rest of you." "And what did you find that constitutes a meeting of every Jounin in the village?" Kakashi asked. "The possibility of a mole." The TNI leader's answer was met with looks of shock and hushed whispers of what village the mole was from. The Sandaime looked at his forces and sighed. People were so easy to unravel. "Everyone be quiet. Let Ibiki finish before you start prattling on like civilian women." His barb had the desired effect. Everyone hushed up quickly, and then they turned their attention back to Ibiki to hear what else he had to say. "Thank you, Lord Hokage," the scarred man acknowledged before continuing. "As I was saying, I have reason to believe that we've been harboring a mole for a number of years without even knowing it." This shocked many of the shinobi present, although some had suspicious looks on their faces as they eyed the back of Anko's head. Some of them still didn't fully trust her. However, Ibiki as well as the Hokage noticed this, and the Jounin decided to put that theory to rest. Again. For those of you who need to be reminded, Anko Mitarashi was not a willing participant in Orochimaru's schemes, and is a loyal member of the Leaf's shinobi forces. "Then who is the mole, Ibiki-san?" came a voice in the crowd. The Jounin in question couldn't see who had spoken though. The coward was hidden behind a small cluster of other ninja. "He's someone who has lived among us since he was a small boy, after we rescued him from the destruction of his village. He even became the adopted son of one of our most respected medical ninja ever produced. I believe the mole is Kabuto Yakushi." The elderly Hokage saw the confusion among his ranks and decided to elaborate for Ibiki. So, standing from his seat, Hiruzen lifted up Naruto's test paper and explained. As he was picking up the written test that helped make up the first portion of the Chunin exams, Ibiki found this note, written on the back of one of the candidates' papers. It explains how young Kabuto revealed having an unusually high level of knowledge in regards to foreign ninja and their skills, down to the number and level of missions they'd taken, and the outcomes as well. But Hokage-sama, what does that have to do with anything? Isn't it good that we have a shinobi with such knowledge? Questioned Ebisu, who stood in the back by Kakashi. Normally yes, the Hokage agreed. But that's not all. He also had such knowledge about members of our own village ranks. I had Ibiki check the boys' home and he found the info cards. This is something I assure you is not common in any village for a genin, no matter how long he's been a shinobi. This got the Jounin's attention. The Hokage was right. No ninja had such detailed information on their fellow shinobi. Only the village Kage would have any extensive knowledge on the village's ranks, and Jounin only knew basic information from the academy files. This was revealing itself to be a potential threat indeed. So then are we going to confront Kabuto Yakushi, Lord Hokage? Kurenai asked from her place beside Anko. Hiruzen shook his head. No, that would get us nowhere. I have reason to believe that this boy is far more dangerous than his rank displays, and unfortunately, physical torture will do no good on a medical specialist of his grade. What about a mind walk? Inoichi Yamanaka, head of the Yamanaka clan and Ino's father, suggested. He was a high-ranking member of the TNI department thanks to his family's special brand of ninjutsu. I had originally thought the same thing before Ibiki explained to me that, with how long this boy may have been working under someone else, there is more than a possibility that he's been conditioned or given some sort of seal that will prevent us from extracting information from his mind. Asuma understood where his father was going with this and stepped forward to voice his belief. So what you're getting at is to leave the kid alone, but keep an eye on him to see if we can catch him in the act with whoever it is he's working for. That's right, because right now we have no real idea, and with the Chunin exams going on, a full investigation may lead to trouble as the other nations may feel betrayed, especially if it's revealed Kabuto does not work for any of them. The Hokage finished. The old man looked on at his Jounin as some went back to muttering their thoughts to each other. His eyes landed on Kakashi, and the two men shared an understanding nod. If this threat turned out to be real, then Naruto was going to need to be reevaluated. That boy, I always knew there was more to him than just being a knucklehead. Triple X. Naruto turned his eyes in the direction of the familiar voice and was a little surprised to find Sasuke standing a few feet away. The raven-haired youth was leaning against a tree, his onyx-black eyes staring intently at Naruto's form. That's what's been all about, Sasuke. What are you talking about? Sasuke pushed off the trunk of the tree. Everything. The sword, the sudden seriousness in your training, and why you called yourself the Demon of the Mist earlier. You're doing it all for that rogue loser we beat back in Wave. Since you apparently heard everything, there's no reason for me to repeat myself. Naruto replied, crossing his arms. But now I have a question for you. Why are you following me? What do you want? Sasuke chuckled. That's two questions, Dobe, and I followed you because I was curious. If I didn't know any better, I'd think you mean about me. But I do know better, so what were you really trying to learn, team? The Uchiha Avenger shifted his hands into his pockets. I was wondering why our sensei, an elite shinobi of such high standard, was wasting his time with you and hasn't spent more than 5 minutes with me. Naruto let out a snort. Che, what, are you gonna pout, Sasuke? Kakashi-sensei spends that time with me because I take the initiative to get his attention. I want to learn, and my reasons are more respectable than a schoolyard crush or some pipe dream ambition. The blonde could see he'd struck a nerve from the way Sasuke's entire body tensed, like a spring being compressed. But he wasn't going to take it back. Sasuke was acting foolish, and he needed to see that. Sasuke glared hatefully at his teammate, his eyes burning with rage. Pipe dream? Your idea of becoming Hokage is a pipe dream, you loser. My ambition is about restoring honor and respect back to my family's name. So don't you dare try to stand there and talk to me about being childish, you orphan. What makes you think you'll ever be a match for Itachi? Naruto demanded. His chest burned with rage from the shot about him being an orphan. Do you think he's just sitting around, Drinking tea? While you train to get stronger? Of course not. And that's why I need Kakashi to focus on me, instead of wasting his time on a loser like you. Sasuke threw back. The young genius began to stalk over to his blonde teammate, his rage boiling over. I won't ever be able to close the gap between us if all I do is sit on the sidelines and watch our Jounin instructor teach someone else. Naruto was beginning to lose it. Sasuke's anger was contagious, as the blonde could feel his pulse pick up and his own muscles tense in preparation for use. However, all the steam he was building up was let out by the arrival of the Jounin in question. Then why don't you just ask me to train you, Sasuke, instead of sulking about it? Kakashi had found them just as Sasuke began his little rant, and although the man didn't hear anything that had been said beforehand, he believed that he had a pretty good idea what had transpired. So Sasuke's getting jealous. I'd hoped to get a reaction out of him, true, but I didn't think it'd be anything this strong. I guess it's time to switch gears. Sasuke whirled around to face his instructor. After I unlocked my Sharingan, I didn't think I'd have to, he replied, nostrils flaring. I figured you'd be more than willing to take me and teach me how to use it, make it stronger. But no, you kept wasting time with Naruto, and now we're in the Chunin exams and my eyes are still only at level 1. Kakashi didn't react in an annoyed or angry way. He simply let his face morph into an eye smile and replied, well now, if you feel so strongly about this, I guess it's only fair I spend some quality time on your training now, doesn't it? All the anger and rage that had built up in Sasuke's system deflated, and the Uchiha heir was left with nothing but his mouth hanging open. What? Well, of course. As long as you have no objections to that, Naruto. The blonde now in question just shrugged and answered, I guess not, Kakashi-sensei. I suppose I'll find someone else to help me while you get the team up to speed. The silver-haired Jounin's smile got a little brighter. Good. Then it's all settled. Wasn't that easy? Seeing that there was nothing left for him to do, Naruto voiced his goodbyes and began the trek back home. However, before he exited the clearing, the Uzumaki turned to look at Sasuke. Oh, and one more thing. The next thing Sasuke knew, he was on his knees, gasping for air as he held his aching stomach. He managed to lift his head to stare into the eyes of his blonde assailant, and gasped at the cold, blue eyes that stared down at him. Don't ever call Zabuza Momochi a loser in front of me again, Sasuke, or belittle my dream of becoming Hokage. With that, the young blonde turned and walked away again, this time not stopping for last words, and continuing on until the 2 remaining members of Team 7 could no longer see him. Kakashi looked down at his new training dummy and sighed. Sasuke, you can't keep looking down on other people's goals and writing them off like that. You fly into a rage when someone does it to you, so how do you think they should react when you do it to them? Sasuke had gotten enough breath back to stand, although his hand still clutched his bruised stomach. He didn't reply to his instructor's question. The raven-haired youth simply stared at the spot Naruto had been standing in before he attacked. He was so fast, faster than I'd ever remembered him being, even during our spars. And that punch, it would have knocked anyone else out cold. Was this what he meant when he talked about fighting seriously? Just how far behind him am I? Ch4, the Forest of Death. Blue eyes examined bronzed hands as they turned and clenched into fists. Birds chirped outside the window, their songs a pleasant sound to wake to on a morning such as this. Today was the start of the second exam. The Forest of Death. Naruto rolled the name around in his head. With a title like that, something tells me we won't be getting out of there without shedding at least a little blood. Just gotta be sure it's not ours. The blonde had already seen death. He stood there and watched as the life faded from Zabuza's eyes. And he'd watched men be killed when the Rouge Ninja slaughtered Gato's thugs, before carving into the man himself. But now there was a real possibility that he would be the one ending someone's life. And Naruto wasn't completely sure what to make of that. In his wanting to honor the fallen mist shinobi, he knew, in the back of his mind, that it meant taking on the deaths of others, but he had managed not to think about it too much since then. Being busy with training helped in that regard. But with the second stage of the Chunin exam staring him in the face, and it being held at a place with a name like Forest of Death, the blonde knew that he wasn't going to get through it without someone being on the business end of his sword. Was he ready for that? Faye, that's a stupid question, he berated himself. No one's ever ready for their first kill. Zabuza probably had to psych himself up big time before taking on that graduating class in Kiri. The man had killed over 100 trained students at the age of 9, and Naruto was just now worrying about killing his first opponent at the age of 13. The blonde shook his head. Oh, how times were different. But I've got to do this, he said to himself while getting up from his bed. I can't honor his memory if I chicken out when it counts, and besides, if I use the hidden mist jutsu I should be okay, right? Since I won't have to see it. Using that reasoning to anchor his resolve, Naruto walked over to the door, slid Kubikirabocho in its place along his back, before exiting his apartment. He had an exam to pass, and he wasn't going to get there in time if he stayed here. Leaving his weights at home again, it didn't take the fledgling killer very long to arrive at his intended destination. Within minutes of speeding over rooftops, the blonde found himself standing atop the edge of a mid-level apartment complex overlooking the Forest of Death. Looks like I wasn't the only one who decided to leave early. Indeed, there were numerous teams already standing around the gated training ground, with more coming up from the roads. Blue eyes scanned the crowd until they settled on a pair standing off to the side. One with a head of raven black hair, the others of vibrant pink. Naruto vanished from the rooftop, then reappeared on the ground, before striding over to his teammates. Sasuke was the first to see him. Remembering what happened yesterday, the Uchiha gave his blonde comrade a heated glare, which Naruto readily ignored. Sakura, seeing her crush's enhanced bad mood, looked around to find what had upset him so. When her eyes landed on Naruto, she sighed. Can't you two go one day without acting this way? Naruto, whatever you did to Sasuke-kun, can you just apologize before the second exam starts? This made the accused blonde scoff. Faye, there's nothing for me to apologize for, Sakura. Besides, the team knows better than to get distracted when it counts. We'll be fine. Yeah, but I'd rather not have to play referee while you two butt heads with each other, Sakura groaned internally. However, before anything more could be said, Anko called out to the teams and instructed them to converge near her. I guess since all the teams are here a little early, there's no point in putting off the test, Sasuke observed. Then, motioning his teammates, he began to skulk over towards the examiner. Instead of trying to walk beside her raven-haired love, Sakura decided to hold back and walk beside the other male on her team. She wanted answers, and her best bet was to ask the blonde. Naruto, what happened yesterday? Sasuke-kun was more angry than normal when I showed up at the testing area. What did you do? Sakura, I already told you it's not important. All that matters right now is passing the second exam. The team knows that too, so just let it go for now. You can wipe the little baby's nose later. Ouch. Naruto's gruff response was cut short by his pink-haired teammate slamming her fist into the crown of his head. The young Kunoichi gave the boy an angry look, growling as she spoke. Don't talk about Sasuke-kun like that, you idiot. That's probably the reason he's so upset, because of that smart mouth of yours. You know, I wouldn't recommend beating up your teammate before this exam, girly. You're gonna need all the help you can get just to survive it. Hearing the voice behind her made Sakura jump. Whipping around, kunai in hand, she came face to face with the proctor. Anko. The purple-haired woman grabbed hold of the younger Kunoichi's wrist and wagged her free finger in scolding manner. And I definitely wouldn't recommend whipping one of these out on me. It might just get you killed. Sakura, a little shaken up from the unexpected encounter, stuttered a response. Well, it's not like we need Naruto Baka to help us get through the test anyway. He's the weakest member. Anko stood to her full height, forcing the pink-haired girl to look up as she gave her retort. Oh, I wouldn't be so sure about that. From what I can tell, he's stronger than the both of you put together. But you did bring up one of the rules for the test, so let me get back to my explanation. With that, The woman vanished in a burst of speed and reappeared back before the fence. All right, listen up. The second phase of the Chunin exams will consist of a 5-day survival test, mixed with capture the flag. Each team will be given one scroll, either a heaven or an earth, and will be required to obtain the other scroll by taking one that belongs to another team. This way, at least half of the teams will be cut from the exams. What? Choji Akimichi cried in despair. 5 days? What am I supposed to do for food? Anko just stared at the overweight boy in surprise. Even she could go 5 days without food. Well, it is a forest, so just find some of the edible plants or a river with some fish. You'll be fine. The plump genin sagged his shoulder at the thought of eating plants. Shikamaru groaned and threw his hand up. When Anko motioned him to speak, the boy asked about giving up. There is no giving up, she replied matter-of-factually. Che, you think in the middle of a battle you can just throw down your weapon and say, "Sorry, I quit"? She thought about it a moment, giggled sadistically, and continued, "Well, I guess you could, but it'd probably get you killed." Shikamaru hung his head in response to her answer and grumbled about what a drag the test was going to be. Now, Anko returned to the rules. Your goal is going to be to obtain one of each scroll and then bring them to the central tower, which is about 6 miles from any one starting gate. But then why are we being given 5 days if it's only 6 miles from the start? Ino wondered out loud. To her, it didn't really make sense. She could run that in less than a day. Because you'll be dealing with the dangerous wildlife and plant life in the forest alongside the threat of other teams' little lady. 5 days may seem like a long time, but trust me when I tell you, they'll go by in the blink of an eye if you aren't careful. Seeing that the platinum blonde was done asking questions, Anko returned to her rules. Finally, there is more than one way to fail this test. Number 1 is obvious. If you are unable to obtain both scrolls within the time limit. 2. Even if you have both but fail to make it to the tower in time. 3. If only 2 members of your squad make it to the tower. And 4. If you look inside the scroll at any time during the test. Kiba raised his hand. But what if one of the scrolls just kinda rolls open and you take a peek? Let's just put it this way, kid, you don't want to know. The special Jounin grinned. During a mission, when you're asked to transport important documents, you're never allowed to look inside. So why should now be any different? Seeing that everyone seemed to understand the test now, Anko pulled a stack of paperwork from her trench coat and handed them to Naruto. Here, kid. Pass these out to the other brats and then take one for yourself. She turned to address the crowd in front of her. What's being handed out are consent forms. You can't take the second exam without filling one out. People may die during the test, and Konoha needs to know that you all are okay with that. Once you've finished, take it to the stand over there, trade it for a scroll, and then get set up next to an entrance. After handing out the forms, Naruto walked away from his team and read over the paper he was required to fill out. It was pretty standard stuff as far as he could tell, and it made sense to have them hand one in. After all, the Leaf can't have another village claiming their ninja were being picked off unfairly. Now can they? A quiet mumbling caught the bandaged blonde's attention. Looking up, his eyes were met with Hinata standing underneath a tree. She looked to be mulling over whether she should sign the form or not. You know, he called out as he walked up to the young heiress. You and your team kinda have an unfair advantage, Hinata-san. The girl in question jumped a little before turning to see who had addressed her. Hinata's cheeks pinked when she saw that it was Naruto who was speaking to her. Then what he'd said finally registered and she stammered out a quiet response. What makes you say that, Naruto? Well, your team specializes in tracking and recon, right? When the shy Kunoichi nodded, he continued. That means you guys must do survival drill a lot. Plus, with your Byakugan, there's no way you guys are gonna get caught off guard. I know I wouldn't want to fight you, Hinata-san. Why you wouldn't? Naruto chuckled lightly at her surprised look. Of course not, you're definitely one of the strongest kunoichi out here, probably the strongest after that crazy chick from Suna. I don't know if I'd survive a fight with someone so strong. The way the girl's face filled with color and her lips curled into a bashful smile, Naruto knew he'd hit his mark. She would compete and she'd do just fine. Turning around so as to get back to his team, the blonde threw up his hand and said his goodbyes. Wait, and Naruto. He stopped and looked back in confusion. Hinata was nervously fiddling with something in her small hands. Walking closer, Naruto asked, "What is it, Hinata-san?" Hinata held out her hands, and blue eyes inspected the item they held. It was a small, brown jar. It's medicine in case you get hurt during the exam. I made it myself." Naruto looked at the dark-haired girl in shock. She was willing to help him during an exam that decided who would become a Chunin and who stayed a genin for another 6 months. "Hinata-san, I don't think I can accept this. I mean, what about your own team?" Hinata shook her head and made a dismissive hum. "Keikiba and Shino already have one, and I always keep one in my weapon pouch just in case. I made this one. For you." The blonde was thrown for a loop. She'd made an extra just or him. Thank you, Hinata. Nobody has ever done something like this for me before. I don't really know what to say." The young heiress just shook her head again and quietly replied, "Why, you don't have to say anything, Naruto."
Just väl.
"Hey, Naruto Baka, hurry up and get over here. We need your consent form to get a scroll, you know." Sakura's loud voice interrupted them. Hinata jumped in surprise, while Naruto let out a small groan. "I'm sorry, Hinata," he apologized. "Maybe we can talk after the second exam is over, and there won't be any annoying interruptions." With that, he waved goodbye again and headed off to join his squad. Back by the tree, Hinata smiled while her lavender eyes dropped down shyly. "He stopped calling me Hinata-san." XXX. Squad 7 stood at the gate they'd chosen to begin the second exam at. Naruto, having slipped the jar Hinata had given him into his weapon pouch for safekeeping. "I think it'd be best if I held the scroll, you guys." Sasuke and Sakura turned to him, looks of disbelief on their faces. "Are you kidding, Dobe? You're probably the first person they'll go after. Why would we give it to you?" "Well, even if that is true, which it's not, we could use that against them, right? They wouldn't expect you to hand over the scroll to one of us, Sasuke, so they'd all think you had it." The blonde's logic made sense, but the Uchiha wasn't having it. "No, we can't afford to place the scroll at risk. I'll hold on to it for now, and then once we get the Heaven Scroll you can carry that one." Naruto just sighed and crossed his arms. If this was how they were going to be, chances were someone was going to get seriously hurt soon. Sakura, who hadn't bothered to comment on the blonde's crazy plan, chose instead to question him on another matter. "So Naruto, what were you and Hinata-san talking about when I found you? You guys were pretty close. Was I interrupting something?" Hinata just seemed a little unsure of herself, Sakura. "So I decided I'd give her a little pep talk. That's all." "You should have left her alone," Sasuke butted in. "If she had gotten scared then she would have dropped out, and then Kiba and Shino would have had to as well, leaving us with that much less competition, Dobe." Naruto's brow scrunched in annoyance, and he shot his teammate a slight glare. "What are you so worried about, team? They're Leaf Shinobi like us. Chances are they won't even try to attack one of their own. Besides, just because your heart's cold and black doesn't mean mine has to be." This seemed to strike a nerve with the Uchiha, because like the day before, his body tensed in preparation for action. But before he could do or say anything, the speakers above their gate came to life. "All right, you maggots, it's time for the second phase of the Chunin exams to begin." With that, the Chunin behind the gate unlocked the padlock that kept it closed. "But before you little brats head out, I've got one more piece of advice for you all. Just don't die." From there, all the gates were thrown open, and many of the teams shot off into the darkness of the forest. Team 7, on the other hand, simply walked through. XXX. "Why are we just walking around like this?" Naruto complained as he and his team continued their light walking pace through the forest of death. "We've been walking for over an hour, and we haven't come across a single team. What the heck are we waiting for?" While he'd accepted the fact that he may have to kill during the exam, it didn't mean the young blonde was in any hurry to do so. If anything, Naruto wanted to find a heaven scroll and get to the tower fast, before something bad happened. Something in this forest just didn't feel right to him. Would you stop complaining already, Naruto? Sakura replied in an annoyed tone. Sasuke-kun already explained it to you. We're moving like this so that we don't get caught off guard by any traps in the trees. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the pink-haired girl but said nothing. Telling them about his feeling wouldn't do any good. It'd probably just provoke the team into going slower so he could call out the threat for a fight. So instead, the blonde turned his senses outward to try and be ready for any signs of ambush. Paid off. After another half hour of walking, Naruto's nose picked up the scent of something foreign. They were being watched. It was a far cry from any of the scents his fellow leaf ninja carried. He'd been around them all long enough to know, and it didn't match anything he'd smelled in the forest so far. This led the blonde to believe that it was an enemy ninja. Using a technique they'd been taught in the academy, Naruto channeled chakra to his ears and increased his hearing. His nose had always been a little more sensitive than most people's, and his ears were sharp from his days of playing pranks, but he was no Inuzuka. He'd need the boost. With the increase in hearing, Naruto managed to hear the enemy's breathing. It was unusual. He must have some sort of mouthpiece on. His breaths are all followed by a strange static-like noise. I'm lucky too. The idiot got close, a little further back, and I wouldn't have noticed him. Naruto continued walking behind his fellow members of Team 7, his mind whirling, trying to come up with a way to draw out the stalker and take him out without giving him chance to escape. He walked for a few more minutes, making sure to keep his senses trained on the enemy ninja, before an idea came to him. But the blonde really wished he could have come up with a better tactic.